Sometimes the most desperate moments lead to the most extraordinary connections. When Liam Callahan faced losing his 6-year-old daughter to the foster care system, he made a choice that would change 3 lives forever. This single father and struggling mechanic in the coastal town of Havenport had been fighting to keep his head above water, working 2 jobs and drowning in medical bills after his daughter's recent hospital stay. When a social worker demanded proof of family stability within 1 week, Liam panicked and claimed he was engaged to a woman who could provide the support they needed. The problem was, he didn't have a fiancée. The solution came from an unexpected source: a mysterious tourist whose car he was fixing, a woman who seemed genuinely moved by his plight and surprisingly willing to help a stranger. What Liam didn't know was that this kind-hearted woman in yoga pants and sunglasses was actually one of the wealthiest people in America, a tech billionaire who had been hiding in plain sight. What would happen when a man who had nothing to give met a woman who had everything to lose? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across Havenport's weathered docks as Liam Callahan wiped grease from his hands with a rag that had seen better days. The smell of salt air mixed with motor oil had become his signature cologne, a testament to the life he'd built from scratch in this forgotten corner of Maine. At 32, his hands told the story of a man who'd learned early that nothing came easy. Calloused palms from years of turning wrenches, a small scar on his thumb from his first week as an apprentice, and the slight tremor that came from too much coffee and too little sleep. His garage sat at the edge of town, where the main road curved toward the harbor, a modest building with peeling paint and a hand-painted sign that read, "Callahan's Auto Repair," in fading blue letters. The business barely kept the lights on, but it was honest work. And in a town where everyone knew everyone's business, honest work mattered more than profit margins. Liam had learned that lesson from his grandfather, who'd run the same garage for 40 years, before arthritis forced him to hand over the keys. The bell above the door chimed as Mrs. Patterson shuffled in, her ancient Buick coughing like a chain smoker in the parking lot. "Morning, Liam," she called, her voice carrying the warmth that had made her Havenport's unofficial grandmother for the past 7 decades. "That old girl's acting up again. Sounds like she's trying to tell me something I don't want to hear." Liam smiled, the kind of genuine expression that had always been his default setting, even when life gave him reasons to frown. "Let me guess she's reminding you that she's older than disco and twice as stubborn?" "That's exactly what she's saying," Mrs. Patterson laughed, fishing in her oversized purse for keys that seemed to play hide and seek. "Though between you and me, I think she just likes your attention. You've got away with cranky old things." If only that were true for people, Liam thought as he accepted the keys. Mrs. Patterson's visits were highlights in his day, brief moments of levity between the constant worry that had become his companion since Rosie was born. 6 years ago, when the doctors placed that tiny, perfect person in his arms, Liam had made a promise that seemed impossible to keep. He would give her everything she needed, no matter what it cost him. The everything part had turned out to be more expensive than he'd calculated. After Mrs. Patterson left with assurances that her Buick would purr like a kitten by evening, Liam turned his attention to the stack of bills that seemed to multiply overnight on his cluttered desk. Medical bills from Rosie's emergency appendectomy 3 months ago dominated the pile, their red final notice stamps glaring at him like accusatory eyes. The surgery had been successful, but the financial recovery was proving more complicated. And the medical one. He pulled out his phone and checked the time. 11:30 a.m. His shift at the security company didn't start until midnight, which gave him 13 hours to fix Mrs. Patterson's car. complete 2 oil changes, and somehow find the energy to be the father Rosie deserved when she got home from school. The math of his life had always been challenging, but lately it felt like trying to solve calculus with crayons. The sound of tires on gravel interrupted his brooding. Through the grimy window, he watched a sleek silver sedan pull into his lot, its paint job reflecting the autumn sun like liquid mercury. The car looked expensive, the kind of expensive that made Liam instinctively check his appearance in the reflection of a chrome bumper. Cars like that usually meant one of 2 things in Havenport: lost tourists or summer people who'd stayed too long and needed local help. The driver's door opened, and a woman stepped out with the fluid grace of someone accustomed to being watched. She wore yoga pants that probably cost more than Liam's grocery budget, and a lightweight sweater that suggested she understood casual elegance in ways that most people didn't. Her dark hair was pulled back in a ponytail that looked effortlessly perfect, and oversized sunglasses hid her eyes despite the relatively modest October sun. Liam wiped his hands again and walked outside, his practiced eye already assessing the vehicle. The car was pristine, except for the front passenger tire, which sat flat against the asphalt like a deflated balloon. "Looks like you've got some bad luck there," he called out, gesturing toward the tire. She turned toward him, and even with the sunglasses, he could sense her relief. "Bad luck seems to be following me lately," she said, her voice carrying a hint of something not quite sadness, but maybe disappointment. "I was hoping you might be able to help. I seem to have picked up a nail somewhere between here and nowhere." "That happens more than you'd think around here," Liam said, kneeling beside the tire to examine the damage. Construction crews have been working on the coast road for months. They tried to clean up, but nails have a way of finding their way into unexpected places. As he worked, she leaned against the car with an ease that suggested she was comfortable in her own skin, a quality Liam had always admired, but never quite mastered himself. "You're not from around here," he observed, not really a question, but an invitation for conversation. "Is it that obvious?" she asked, and he caught what might have been amusement in her tone. "Well, the car's a dead giveaway," he admitted, standing up and brushing dirt from his knees. "But it's more than that. You've got that look people get when they're seeing a place for the first time, like you're trying to figure out if it's what you expected. And what did you decide I was expecting?" Liam considered this as he retrieved his jack from the garage. Probably something quainter, maybe with more lobster shacks and fewer auto repair shops that look like they're held together with duct tape and determination. She laughed, a genuine sound that made him look up from his work. "Actually, this is exactly what I was hoping to find. Sometimes the real places are more interesting than the postcard versions. Real is definitely what we specialize in around here," Liam said, loosening the lug nuts with practiced efficiency. "Though I'm not sure everyone would consider that a selling point." "You'd be surprised," she said softly, in a way that made him glance at her, curiously as he worked on changing the tire. She wandered around the lot with the unhurried steps of someone who didn't have anywhere urgent to be. She paused to examine the hand-painted sign, ran her fingers along the weathered fence that separated his property from the harbor, and seemed genuinely interested in the collection of vintage hubcaps that his grandfather had arranged along the garage wall like chrome. "Flowers. How long have you been here?" she asked, settling onto an overturned crate that served as his outdoor seating area. "All my life, pretty much," Liam replied, wrestling with a particularly stubborn lug nut. "My grandfather started this place in 1975. My father was supposed to take it over, but he had different ideas about what constituted a successful life." "Different how?" Liam paused, surprised by his own willingness to share personal details with a stranger. There was something about her, maybe the way she listened, or the fact that she didn't seem to be in a hurry to be somewhere else, that invited honesty. He thought success meant leaving, getting out of small-town life and making something bigger of himself. Last I heard, he was selling insurance in Phoenix and had convinced himself that air conditioning was worth more than ocean air. And you? Disagreed? I disagreed with the leaving part, Liam said carefully, though I'll admit there are days when I wonder if he might have had a point about the success part. Before she could respond, the sound of small feet running on gravel announced Rosie's arrival. School had let out early something about a teachers' conference that Liam had forgotten about until this moment. His daughter appeared around the corner of the garage like a 6-year-old hurricane, her backpack bouncing against her small frame and her dark curls escaping from the braids he'd attempted that morning. "Daddy?" she called, launching herself at him with the absolute trust that children reserve for their favorite people. Liam caught her easily, lifting her up despite the grease on his hands and a tire iron in his grip. "Hey, sunshine," he said, his voice automatically shifting to the gentler tone he used exclusively for her. "How was school?" "Mrs. Chun says we're going to learn about ocean animals next week, and I told her you know everything about the ocean, 'cause you live right next to it," Rosie announced with the confidence of someone who believed her father was capable of anything. "I'm not sure I know everything," Liam said, setting her down gently, "but I know enough to be dangerous." Rosie's attention immediately shifted to the elegant stranger, watching their interaction with what looked like interest rather than annoyance. In Liam's experience, expensive cars and small children didn't usually mix well, but this woman seemed genuinely charmed by his daughter's enthusiasm. "Hello," Rosie said with the bold friendliness that had always been her superpower. "I'm Rosie, and that's my daddy. He fixes cars and makes the best pancakes in the whole world. Though Mrs. Patterson says her pancakes are better, but I think she's wrong because Daddy puts chocolate chips in his, and Mrs. Patterson thinks chocolate chips are too exciting for breakfast." The woman removed her sunglasses for the first time, revealing eyes that were an unusual shade of green, like sea glass held up to sunlight. When she smiled at Rosie, her entire face transformed in a way that made Liam forget about tire changes and medical bills for a moment. "Hello, Rosie," she said. "I'm Maya, and I happen to think chocolate chips are exactly the right amount of exciting for breakfast. See, Daddy?" Rosie turned to him with vindication written across her features. "Maya knows about breakfast." "Maya has excellent taste," Liam agreed, finishing with the tire and standing up to dust off his hands. "There you go," he said to Maya, "good as new. Though you might want to drive carefully on the coast road until they finish construction." Maya stood up from the crate, and Liam found himself noticing details he'd missed before. The way she moved with unconscious grace, the fact that her casual clothes couldn't hide a sense of quality that went beyond price tags, and something in her expression that suggested she was accustomed to being somewhere else entirely. "What do I owe you?" she asked, reaching for a wallet that looked like it had never seen the inside of a discount store. $25, Liam said, the same price he charged everyone for a basic tire change, though he suspected she was accustomed to paying more for most things. As Maya handed him the money, Rosie tugged on his sleeve with the persistence of someone who had something important to say. "Daddy, you forgot to ask if Maya wants to see the hermit crabs. You always show visitors the hermit crabs." Liam felt heat rise in his cheeks. "Rosie, Maya probably has places to be. Not everyone wants to see our hermit crab collection." "Actually," Maya said, surprising him, "I'd love to see the hermit crabs. I don't think I've ever been properly introduced to any." Rosie's face lit up like Christmas morning. "They live in the tide pools behind the garage. Daddy says they're like tiny homeowners who can't decide which house they like best." For the next 20 minutes, Liam found himself leading an impromptu nature tour, watching Maya crouch beside tide pools with genuine interest as Rosie explained the complex social dynamics of hermit crab society. Maya asked thoughtful questions and seemed genuinely delighted when a particularly bold crab allowed her to observe its shell-changing process up close. "He's looking for an upgrade," Rosie explained seriously. Daddy says that's called moving up in the world. Smart crab, Maya said, glancing at Liam with an expression he couldn't quite read. Sometimes a change of scenery is exactly what you need. As they walked back toward the garage, Rosie chattering about everything from her favorite teacher to her plans for Halloween, Liam found himself studying Maya with increasing curiosity. She didn't fit any of the categories he usually used to understand people. She was clearly well off, but she lacked the impatience or condescension he'd come to expect from wealthy tourists. She seemed genuinely interested in his daughter's stories, and she'd spent 20 minutes looking at hermit crabs without once checking her phone. "Thank you," Maya said as they reached her car. "This has been exactly what I needed today." "A flat tire and a hermit crab lecture?" Liam asked. "Perspective," she said simply. "Sometimes you don't realize what you're missing until you find it in the most unexpected places." She started to get into her car, then paused. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "You seem like someone who's figured out what matters most. How do you do it? How do you know you're living the right life?" The question caught him off guard. Most people who asked him about his life choices were suggesting he should be making different ones. "I don't know if I've figured anything out," he said honestly, "but I think maybe the right life is the one where you go to sleep knowing you've done everything you could for the people who count on you." Maya nodded slowly, as if his answer confirmed something she'd been thinking. "That's a good way to measure things." "Maya," Rosie called from where she was collecting shells near the water's edge. "Are you going to come back and visit us?" Maya looked at Rosie, then at Liam, and something shifted in her expression. "I hope so," she said, and Liam had the strange feeling that she meant it more than either of them expected. As the silver sedan pulled out of the lot and disappeared around the curve toward town, Liam realized he was still holding the worn teddy bear that Rosie had dropped during their crab expedition. The bear was missing an eye and had been sewn back together more times than he could count, but Rosie refused to sleep without it. Like everything else in their life, it had been patched and repatched until it was more repair than original, but it still did its job. "Daddy," Rosie said, appearing at his elbow, "I like Maya. She listened to my stories like they were important." "They are important," Liam said, handing her the bear and ruffling her hair. "And I like her too." As they walked back toward the garage, Rosie's small hand in his, Liam couldn't shake the feeling that Maya's visit had been more than just a random flat tire. There had been something in her questions, something in the way she'd looked at their simple life, that suggested she was searching for answers to questions he couldn't even imagine asking. But that was the thing about unexpected encounters. They had a way of mattering more than you realized until much later, when you looked back and recognized them as the moments when everything changed. 3 days after Maya's visit, Liam was elbow deep in the engine of a 1998 Ford pickup when he heard the sound that made every parent's heart skip a beat: official footsteps on gravel. He looked up to see a woman in a navy blazer approaching. His garage, clipboard in hand, and expression set in the neutral mask that government employees wore when delivering news that nobody wanted to hear. "Mr. Callahan?" she called, her voice carrying the practiced authority of someone accustomed to difficult conversations. "I'm Jennifer Hayes from the Department of Health and Human Services. We need to talk." Liam wiped his hands on his coveralls, buying himself a few seconds to process what this visit might mean. Social services didn't make house calls unless something was seriously wrong, and in his experience, when something was seriously wrong, it usually involved Rosie. "Of course," he said, gesturing toward the small office attached to his garage. "Can I ask what this is about?" Jennifer Hayes settled into the metal, folding chair across from his desk, with the efficiency of someone who conducted these meetings multiple times a day. She was younger than he'd expected, probably early 30s, with short brown hair and wire-rimmed glasses that gave her a scholarly appearance. But her eyes held the weary determination of someone who'd seen too many families. in crisis and had learned to keep professional distance as a survival mechanism. This is a routine follow-up regarding Rosie's recent hospitalization. She began consulting her clipboard with the precision of someone reading from a script. When children receive emergency medical care, especially in cases involving significant financial hardship, we're required to conduct a family stability assessment. Liam felt his stomach drop. Stability assessment? We need to ensure that children in vulnerable situations have adequate support systems and that their basic needs are being met consistently. She pulled a thick folder from her briefcase and spread several documents across his cluttered desk. I've reviewed your financial records from the hospital billing department, and I have some concerns. The word concerns hit Liam like a physical blow. He'd known this day might come, had spent sleepless nights worrying about it, but somehow he'd convinced himself that love and determination would be enough to keep his family together. Now, faced with official letterhead and government protocols, his optimism felt naive. What kind of concerns? He asked, though part of him already knew the answer. Jennifer consulted her notes with the methodical thoroughness of someone who delivered this speech before. Your current debt-to-income ratio indicates significant financial stress. The medical bills from Rosie's surgery total nearly $18,000, and our records show you're currently 3 months behind on rent. Additionally, you're working 2 jobs that together barely meet the federal poverty guidelines for a household of 2. Each fact she recited felt like another nail in a coffin he hadn't realized was being built around his life. I've never missed a payment to the hospital, he said, hearing the defensiveness in his own voice. They have me on a payment plan. $25 a month, which is what I can afford right now. At $25 a month, it would take you 60 years to pay off the debt, Jennifer said, not unkindly, but with the stark clarity of someone who dealt in numbers rather than dreams. The hospital has indicated they may need to pursue legal collection, which could result in wage garnishment. That would further compromise your ability to provide for Rosie's basic needs. Liam stared at the papers spread across his desk, seeing his life reduced to statistics and risk factors. What exactly are you saying? I'm saying that the state has an obligation to ensure children's welfare. When we identify situations where a child's stability is at risk, we have protocols we must follow. She pulled out another form, this one bearing an official seal that made Liam's hands shake. This is a preliminary assessment notice. It means we'll be conducting a comprehensive review of Rosie's living situation over the next week. And if you decide her living situation isn't adequate, Jennifer's expression softened slightly, revealing the human being beneath the professional facade. Mr. Callahan, I can see that you love your daughter very much. That's not in question. But love alone isn't always enough to provide the stability children need. If our assessment determines that Rosie would be better served in a more stable environment, you take her away from me. The words came out as a statement rather than a question, heavy with the weight of his worst fear becoming reality. We'd explore placement options that prioritize her welfare, while working with you to address the factors that created the instability. The clinical language couldn't disguise what she was really saying. Liam looked around his small office, taking in the photos of Rosie that covered every available surface. Her first day of school, the 2 of them at last year's 4th of July parade, her sitting on his shoulders at the beach. Each picture told the story of a life built on love and sacrifice. But apparently love and sacrifice weren't enough when measured against government standards. What would I need to do? He asked, quietly. To keep her, what would I need to prove? Jennifer consulted her clipboard again. The primary concerns are financial stability and family support systems. If you could demonstrate consistent income above poverty guidelines and show evidence of family stability, perhaps through marriage or a committed partnership that provides additional support that would significantly strengthen your case. The word marriage hung in the air like a lifeline he couldn't reach. Liam thought about his last serious relationship, which had ended 2 years ago when his girlfriend decided that dating a single father was too complicated for her lifestyle goals. Since then, his romantic life had consisted of brief encounters that ended when women realized that his daughter would always come first. "How long do I have?" he asked. "The comprehensive assessment will take place Friday afternoon. That gives you 6 days to address any concerns and demonstrate the stability we need to see." She began gathering her papers with the efficient movements of someone ready to move on to the next case. "I'll need to speak with Rosie as part of the assessment, and I'll want to see your living situation firsthand." As Jennifer stood to leave, Liam felt panic rising in his chest like floodwater. 6 days to prove he was worthy of keeping his daughter. 6 days to demonstrate financial stability he didn't have and family support that didn't exist. 6 days to somehow transform his life into something that would satisfy bureaucratic requirements while maintaining the authenticity that made it worth living. "Ms. Hayes," he called as she reached the door. What if I was engaged? Would that help with the family support requirement?" She paused, considering the question with the careful attention of someone who understood the weight of her words. A committed partnership, especially one that includes financial contribution and emotional support for both you and Rosie, would certainly be viewed favorably. It would demonstrate that you're building a stable family unit rather than struggling alone. After she left, Liam sat in his empty office, staring at the spot where she'd laid out his life in terms of deficits and risk factors. The silence was broken only by the distant sound of waves against the harbor rocks and the ticking of the ancient clock his grandfather had hung on the wall 40 years ago. He thought about calling his sister in California, but Sarah had her own family and her own problems. He considered asking Mrs. Patterson to vouch for him, but a 73-year-old neighbor wasn't going to convince anyone that he had a stable support system. His mind cycled through every person he knew, searching for someone who might be willing to help him navigate this impossible situation. Then he heard the sound of gravel crunching under expensive tires. Through the window, he watched the same silver sedan that had visited 3 days ago pull into his lot. Maya stepped out, wearing dark jeans and a cream-colored sweater that probably cost more than his monthly grocery budget. She moved with the same unhurried grace he remembered, but today there was something different in her posture, a purposefulness that suggested she'd come here for a specific reason. "Hello again," she said as she approached the garage. "I hope you don't mind me coming back. I was in the area and thought I'd check on the hermit crabs." Despite everything that had just happened, Liam found himself smiling. "They'll be excited to see you. Rosie's been talking about you all week." "And how are you?" Maya asked, and something in her tone suggested she was asking more than a casual question. Before he could formulate a response that didn't involve admitting his life was falling apart, the words tumbled out with the desperate honesty of someone who'd run out of options. "Actually, I'm in trouble. Big trouble. And I'm about to ask you something that's going to sound completely insane." Maya tilted her head, and even with her sunglasses on, he could sense her full attention. "Try me. Would you be willing to pretend to be my fiancée for 1 day?" The question hung between them like a bridge over an impossible chasm. Maya didn't respond immediately, but she didn't laugh or walk away either. Instead, she seemed to be considering his request with the same serious attention she'd given Rosie's hermit crab lecture. "Tell me what's happening," she said finally. And so, standing in the gravel parking lot of his failing garage, with the autumn wind carrying the scent of salt and uncertainty, Liam told a stranger about social services and financial assessments, and the very real possibility that he might lose the most important person in his world. He told her about working 2 jobs that barely paid enough to survive, and medical bills that multiplied faster than he could count them. He told her about the love that felt infinite, but apparently wasn't sufficient when measured against bureaucratic standards. When he finished, Maya was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached up and removed her sunglasses, revealing those unusual green eyes that seemed to see more than most people looked for. "One day?" she asked. "Just long enough to convince a social worker that Rosie has a stable family environment. I know how it sounds, and I know I have no right to ask. But yes," Maya said simply. "Yes, I'll help you." She looked toward the harbor, where fishing boats were making their way back to port in the late afternoon light. "Though I think we should probably discuss what being engaged to each other would actually look like." Liam felt something loosen in his chest, a knot of desperation that had been tightening for days. "You don't even know me." "I know enough," Maya said. "I know. You're a good father who's doing everything he can for his daughter. I know you care more about hermit crabs than most people care about anything important. And I know that sometimes good people need help that they can't ask for, except in moments of complete desperation." As they stood there in the gathering dusk, Liam realized that Maya's flat tire 3 days ago might have been the most fortunate accident of his life. He didn't know why she was willing to help him, didn't understand what she might gain from participating in such an elaborate deception, but he was grateful in a way that went beyond words. "Thank you," he said, meaning it more than he'd ever meant anything. "Don't thank me yet," Maya replied, a hint of something amusement, nervousness, in her voice. "We haven't figured out how to convince anyone that we're actually in love." But as Liam looked at this woman who'd appeared in his life like an answer to a prayer he'd been too proud to pray, he had the strange feeling that the hardest part might not be convincing other people they were in love. The hardest part might be remembering it was all pretend. The next morning arrived with the kind of coastal fog that made Havenport look like a town suspended between sea and sky. Liam had spent most of the night staring at his ceiling, alternating between relief that Maya had agreed to help and terror about what they'd actually committed to doing. By the time dawn crept through his bedroom window, he'd rehearsed a dozen different conversations about how two virtual strangers might convince a trained social worker that they were building a life together. Maya arrived at the garage just after 8, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the kind of confident expression that suggested she'd spent her sleepless hours more productively than he had. She handed him one of the cups somehow. She'd remembered that he took it black and settled onto the same overturned crate where she'd sat during their first real conversation. "I've been thinking about our story," she said without preamble. "If we're going to do this, we need to get our facts straight." Liam took a grateful sip of coffee and marveled at how natural she made this conversation sound. What kind of facts? The kind that engaged couples know about each other. How we met, how long we've been together, when we decided to get married, where we're planning to live. Maya pulled a small notebook from her purse, already filled with neat handwriting. "I made some notes." "You made notes about our fake relationship?" "Details matter," she said with a kind of matter-of-fact tone that suggested she approached most problems with thorough preparation. Social workers are trained to spot inconsistencies. If we tell different versions of our story, or if we can't answer basic questions about each other, she'll know something's wrong. Liam studied Maya's profile as she consulted her notebook, wondering again what had motivated her to agree to this. Elaborate deception. In the morning light, she looked different than she had during their previous encounters, more purposeful, as if helping him navigate this crisis had given her a mission that she intended to complete successfully. "All right," he said. "What's our story?" "We met 6 weeks ago when I brought my car in for a tire change," Maya began, reading from her notes. "It was attraction at first sight, but we took things slowly because you were cautious about introducing someone new to Rosie's life." "That part's actually true," Liam admitted. "The cautious part, I mean." "Good. The best lies are mostly truth with a few strategic modifications." Maya flipped a page in her notebook. "We've been dating steadily for a month. Last weekend, during a walk on the beach with Rosie, you proposed with your grandfather's ring. Liam nearly choked on his coffee. My grandfather's ring? Do you have it? Well, yes, but perfect. We'll need it for Friday. Maya made another note. The proposal was simple but heartfelt. You told me that Rosie needed a mother, and you needed a partner, and you asked if I wanted to build a family with both of you. The fictional proposal sounded so reasonable, so natural, that Liam found himself almost wishing it had happened that way. And you said yes because I've never met a man who put his child's needs before his own ego, and because I fell in love with both of you. Maya looked up from her notebook, and for a moment, her expression was so sincere that Liam forgot they were discussing a performance. That's the story we're telling. What about your background? She's going to ask about your job, your family, your financial situation. For the first time since arriving, Maya hesitated. I work in technology, corporate consulting. I have some savings that would help stabilize your situation, and I'm planning to work remotely from Havenport after we're married. Technology consulting was vague enough to be meaningless, but Liam didn't press for details. Everyone was entitled to their privacy, and Maya was doing him a favor that he couldn't possibly repay. If she wanted to keep her professional life private, that was her prerogative. What about living arrangements? He asked. I'll move in with you and Rosie after the wedding. We're planning a small ceremony in the spring, just family and close friends. Maya closed her notebook and looked directly at him. Now we need to practice acting like we're actually engaged. Practice how? Come here, Maya said, standing up and gesturing for him to join her. Liam approached cautiously, suddenly aware of the grease under his fingernails and the fact that his work clothes probably smelled like motor oil and desperation. Maya seemed oblivious to these concerns as she stepped closer, closing the distance between them with the confidence of someone accustomed to making decisions and following through on them. Engaged couples are comfortable with physical affection, she said, reaching for his hand. We need to look natural together, not like strangers who just met. Her hand was softer than he'd expected, with fingers that suggested she spent more time with keyboards than tools. But her grip was firm, and she didn't pull away when his rough palm made contact with her smooth skin. This feels ridiculous, Liam said. Most acting does, until you get used to it. Maya adjusted their position so they were standing side by side, her shoulder brushing against his arm. Tell me something real about yourself. Something you'd actually share with someone you were planning to marry. The request caught him off guard. Something real? We're going to be answering personal questions in front of someone whose job is to evaluate relationships. If we're going to be convincing, we need to actually know each other. Liam considered this, looking out toward the harbor where the morning fog was beginning to lift. I'm terrified that I'm not enough, he said finally. Not smart enough, not successful enough, not stable enough to give Rosie the life she deserves. Every day I worry that I'm failing her in ways I don't even understand. Maya's hand tightened around his. That's the most honest thing anyone said to me in months. Your turn, Liam said, surprised by his own willingness to be vulnerable with someone he barely knew. Maya was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice carried a weight that suggested she rarely shared personal truths with anyone. I'm exhausted by people who want things from me. Money, connections, access to opportunities they think I can provide. Sometimes I feel like I'm more valuable for what I can give people than for who I actually am. Is that why you're here? In Havenport, partly. I needed to remember what it felt like to be around people who didn't know what I could do for them. She looked at him with an expression that was hard to read. And then you asked me to pretend to be your fiancée, which is definitely wanting something from me. But somehow it doesn't feel the same. Because you know I can't give you anything in return? Because you asked me to help you keep your daughter, not to help you get something you don't deserve. Maya stepped back, breaking their physical connection, but maintaining eye contact. There's a difference. Before Liam could respond, they heard the sound of small feet running across gravel. Rosie appeared around the corner of the garage, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders and her face bright with the kind of excitement that could only mean she'd spotted Maya's car in the parking lot. "Maya," she called, launching herself forward with the confidence of someone who expected to be caught. "Daddy said you might come back, and I saved you a shell that looks exactly like a tiny ice cream cone." Maya caught Rosie in a hug that looked completely natural, and Liam felt something shift in his chest as he watched the two of them together. There was an ease between them that couldn't be faked, a genuine affection that had developed during their brief previous encounters. "Let me see this shell," Maya said seriously, allowing Rosie to lead her toward the tide pools where her collection of treasures waited for inspection. As Liam followed them, he realized that Maya was right about needing to practice their relationship, but watching her interact with his daughter, seeing the way Rosie's face lit up in Maya's presence, he had the unsettling feeling that the hardest part of their deception wouldn't be convincing Jennifer Hayes that they were engaged. The hardest part would be remembering to stop acting when the performance was over. Later that morning, after Rosie had left for school with promises that Maya would still be there when she returned, they sat in Liam's small apartment above the garage, trying to create a living space that looked like it belonged to an engaged couple. Maya had surveyed the modest rooms with the practical eye of someone accustomed to solving problems, and she'd immediately identified several areas that needed attention. "We need evidence that I'm moving in," she said, opening dresser drawers and examining closet space. "A few pieces of clothing, some personal items, maybe some of my books mixed in with yours." "You're going to bring actual belongings here?" "Temporary ones. Nothing I can't live without for a week." Maya pulled out her phone and began typing notes. "I'll also need to be here when she arrives for the assessment. We should be doing something. Domestic cooking dinner together, helping Rosie with homework, the kind of things that real families do." Liam watched her move around his space with growing amazement. Maya had transformed their deception into a project, complete with logistics and timelines and measurable objectives. It was simultaneously impressive and slightly terrifying to see how efficiently she approached what felt like the most emotionally charged situation of his life. "Can I ask you something?" he said as she measured his bedroom closet with the tape measure she produced from her purse. "Of course. Why are you being so thorough about this?" "I mean, I'm grateful, but this is going way beyond what anyone would consider a favor to a stranger." Maya paused in her measuring, and for a moment her organized exterior cracked slightly. "I suppose it's because I've never had to fight for something that mattered more than money or business deals. Watching you try to keep your family together, it's the most important thing I've seen anyone do in a very long time." "And you want to be part of something important?" "I want to help something important succeed." She resumed measuring, but her movements were less crisp than before. "Besides, it's been a while since I've had a project that felt like it actually mattered." That afternoon, Maya returned with 2 suitcases and an armload of shopping bags. She'd spent the day acquiring what she called relationship evidence framed photos of the 3 of them that she'd somehow had professionally printed, women's toiletries for his bathroom, and a small collection of books that she arranged on his shelves with the kind of casual precision that suggested someone had actually been living there for weeks. "Where did you get photos of us?" Liam asked, examining a picture that showed him and Maya laughing while Rosie built a sandcastle between them. "I had them created," Maya said matter-of-factly. "Digital editing. They're not perfect, but they'll pass a casual inspection." "You had fake photos made of our fake relationship." "Details matter," she said again, hanging one of the pictures on his bedroom wall. "Besides, we needed visual evidence of our courtship." As the afternoon wore on, Liam found himself marveling at Maya's attention to detail. She'd thought of everything, from the way she arranged her clothes in his closet, to the coffee mug she placed in his dish drainer, as if she'd been drinking her morning coffee there for weeks. She'd even brought groceries that reflected shared meal planning and a set of hand towels that coordinated with his bathroom in ways he'd never considered. "This is either very impressive or very disturbing," he said, watching her program her contact information into his refrigerator's emergency contact list. "Probably both," Maya admitted, "but it's going to work." When Rosie came home from school, she was delighted to discover Maya's belongings scattered throughout their apartment with the natural disorder of someone who actually lived there. She immediately claimed the right to help Maya unpack, chattering about everything from her spelling test to her plans for Halloween. Wow. Maya listened with the kind of focused attention that most adults reserve for people who sign their paychecks. "Are you really going to live here now?" Rosie asked as she helped Maya arrange books on the living room shelf. Maya glanced at Liam, and he saw something flicker across her expression: uncertainty, maybe, or guilt about the elaborate deception they were constructing around his innocent daughter. "For a while," Maya said carefully. "Your daddy and I are still figuring out some details." "Good," Rosie announced with the definitive satisfaction of someone who'd reached an important conclusion. "Because I think you like it here, and I think we like having you." As evening approached and they prepared dinner together, the kind of domestic scene they'd need to recreate for Jennifer, Liam found himself studying Maya's face for signs that she was struggling with the complexity of their situation. But if she was having second thoughts about their elaborate charade, she hid them well. Instead, she seemed genuinely content to help Rosie set the table while he cooked pasta with a kind of easy familiarity that shouldn't have been possible between virtual strangers. When Rosie insisted that Maya sit in what was apparently her designated chair, Maya accepted the assignment with the grace of someone who understood that small rituals mattered more than comfort or logic. After dinner, as they worked together to clean the kitchen while Rosie did homework at the dining room table, Liam realized that their fake domestic life felt more natural than most of his real relationships had. Maya anticipated his movements, handed him dishes without being asked, and somehow made their small space feel larger rather than more crowded. "Thank you," he said quietly as they finished drying the last of the plates. "For what?" "For making this feel normal. For making Rosie feel like she's getting something good instead of losing something." Maya hung up the dish towel with the kind of careful precision she brought to everything, but when she looked at him, her expression was softer than he'd seen before. "Maybe she's not the only one getting something good," she said before he could ask what she meant. Rosie appeared at his elbow with her math homework and a request for help with fractions that involved chocolate chip cookies. As the three of them crowded around the dining room table, working through problems about dividing hypothetical desserts, Liam had the dangerous thought that this felt like the kind of life he'd always wanted but never believed he could have. The thought should have been comforting. Instead, it scared him more than anything Jennifer Hayes had said about stability assessments and family support systems. Because in 4 days, when their performance was over, and Maya returned whatever life she'd temporarily abandoned to help he was going to have to figure out how to go back to being grateful for what he had instead of missing what he'd lost. Maya's encrypted laptop sat closed on Liam's kitchen counter like a sleek silver reminder that she belonged to a world he couldn't begin to understand. For the past 2 days, she'd been living in his apartment with the seamless efficiency of someone accustomed to adapting to new environments. But the laptop remained untouched except for the occasional anxious glance she cast in its direction. When she thought he wasn't looking, Thursday morning brought the kind of autumn weather that made Havenport look like a postcard: crisp air, brilliant sunshine, and leaves that had turned the exact shade of gold that tourists drove hours to photograph. Maya was already dressed and drinking coffee when Liam emerged from his bedroom, her hair pulled back in a ponytail that somehow managed to look both casual and elegant. "You're up early," he said, noting that she'd already prepared breakfast. For Rosie, who was currently explaining the complex social dynamics of first-grade lunch tables, while systematically removing all the blueberries from her pancakes. "I've always been an early riser," Maya said, though something in her tone suggested she'd been awake for reasons that had nothing to do with natural circadian rhythms. "Besides, we should probably practice being a family before the real performance tomorrow." The word performance hit Liam with an unexpected pang. Over the past 48 hours, their artificial domestic life had begun to feel increasingly natural. Maya had developed a morning routine that complemented his, anticipating his need for coffee and managing Rosie's breakfast with the kind of intuitive efficiency that suggested she genuinely enjoyed the task. More unsettling, Liam had found himself looking forward to these morning moments, to the easy conversation and shared responsibility that made his perpetually chaotic life feel momentarily manageable. "Daddy," Rosie announced, having successfully excavated all fruit from her pancakes. "Maya knows how to make French braids, and she said she'd teach me if you say it's okay." Liam looked at Maya, who was studying her coffee with the kind of intense focus that suggested she was avoiding eye contact. "You know how to French braid?" "I had a lot of time to learn various skills growing up," Maya said, which wasn't really an answer, but was delivered with enough finality to discourage follow-up questions. "Maya knows lots of things," Rosie continued, oblivious to adult undercurrents. "She knows why hermit crabs change shells, and she knows all the words to the song about the octopus's garden, and she knows how to make pancakes that are perfectly round instead of looking like clouds with stomach aches." "Your pancakes don't look like clouds with stomach aches," Liam protested, though he had to admit that Maya's pancakes achieved a geometric precision that is never managed. "It's fine, Daddy. Maya says you have lots of other talents that are more important than pancake shape." Liam caught Maya's eye, and she gave him a small smile that seemed to acknowledge both the absurdity of their situation and the genuine affection that had developed between her and Rosie. Watching them together, he was struck again by how natural their relationship seemed, how effortlessly Maya had slipped into a role that should have felt foreign and temporary. After Rosie left for school with promises to demonstrate her new braiding skills when she returned, Maya and Liam found themselves alone in the apartment for the first time since their domestic experiment had begun. The silence felt different than it had before, less comfortable, more charged with awareness of everything they weren't discussing. "Your laptop's been buzzing," Liam said, nodding toward the kitchen counter where Maya's computer had been humming intermittently since dawn. Maya's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "Work emails. Nothing that can't wait. Must be some pretty persistent coworkers if they're emailing you this early." "Technology consulting is a global business," Maya said, which was another non-answer, delivered with the same polite finality she'd used when discussing her braiding skills. Liam studied her profile as she gathered breakfast dishes with movements that were slightly too precise, too controlled. Maya had been generous with personal details about her past relationships and her reasons for being in Havenport, but she'd revealed almost nothing about her professional life beyond vague references to corporate consulting and remote work capabilities. For someone who'd spent the past 2 days creating elaborate fictional evidence of their relationship, she was remarkably guarded about the reality of her own life. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Of course. Are you in some kind of trouble? With work, I mean." Maya paused in her dish gathering, and for a moment her carefully maintained composure wavered. "Why would you think that?" "Because you've been here for 3 days helping a stranger navigate a custody crisis, and you keep looking at your laptop like it contains information that you don't want to deal with. Most people with demanding jobs can't just disappear for a week without consequences. Most people don't have the luxury of flexible schedules," Maya said, resuming her cleaning with renewed efficiency. "And you do have that luxury?" Maya set down the plate she'd been scrubbing and turned to face him directly. "Liam, I appreciate your concern, But my work situation is complicated in ways that would take longer to explain than we have time for. What matters is that I'm here, and I'm committed to helping you get through tomorrow's assessment." The dismissal was polite, but unmistakable, and Liam recognized the tone of someone who'd had practiced deflecting unwanted questions. He also recognized the irony of being shut out of Maya's real life while she was fully embedded in his fictional. "Okay," he said. "But if you need to handle work stuff, don't feel like you have to hide it from me. I understand that this isn't your real life." Something flickered across Maya's expression. Hurt, maybe, or disappointment. Right, of course. The conversation left an uncomfortable tension between them that persisted as they went about their respective morning routines. Maya disappeared into the bedroom with her laptop, claiming she needed to handle a few urgent emails, while Liam headed to the garage to work on Mrs. Patterson's Buick and tried to ignore the sound of Maya's increasingly tense phone conversations, drifting through the apartment floor. By midday, the tension had evolved into something that felt almost like a real relationship conflict, complete with careful politeness and the kind of elaborate consideration for each other's space that suggested. They were both annoyed, but trying to hide it. Liam found himself wondering if this was what actual couples fought about. The balance between professional obligations and personal commitments, the challenge of integrating two separate lives into something that functioned as a unit. The thought was unsettling because it implied a level of emotional investment in their relationship that went beyond the practical requirements of their deception. Maya emerged from the bedroom just as Liam was finishing his lunch, her expression set in the kind of determined cheerfulness that suggested she'd decided to power through whatever work crisis was demanding her attention. "I thought we could work on our engagement story this afternoon," she said, settling at the kitchen table with a notebook that wasn't the same one she'd used for their relationship timeline. "We should be prepared for detailed questions about how you proposed." "Right, the proposal that happened last weekend during our romantic beach walk. With Rosie present, because you wanted her to be part of the moment when you asked me to become her stepmother." Liam studied Maya's face, looking for signs that she was as aware as he was of how their fictional relationship kept developing emotional complexity that their real relationship couldn't support. "And you said yes, because you'd fallen in love with both of us." "Because I'd never met a man who understood that loving someone means loving all the people who matter to them." The response was delivered with the same matter-of-fact tone Maya used for most of their planning sessions, but something in her expression suggested she meant it more literally than their performance required. "Maya," Liam said carefully, "yesterday you said that maybe Rosie wasn't the only one getting something good out of this arrangement. What did you mean?" Maya's pen stilled on her notebook, and for a long moment she seemed to be considering how much truth their fictional relationship could bear. "I meant that I've never been part of a family before," she said finally. "Not a real one, anyway. And even though I know this is temporary, even though I know it's not real, it's the closest I've ever come to understanding what people mean when they talk about belonging somewhere." The admission hung between them like a bridge that neither of them was sure they should cross. Liam found himself studying Maya's face, looking for clues about the life she'd left behind to help him navigate his crisis. What kind of existence didn't include family? What kind of success left someone so isolated that a fake relationship felt like the most authentic connection they'd experienced? "What about your family?" he asked. "Your real family?" "I don't have one. Not in any way that matters. Parents? Siblings?" Maya's smile was the kind that didn't reach her eyes. "My parents viewed children as investments with expected returns. When I proved to be a profitable investment, they were pleased. When I became financially independent enough that they couldn't control my returns, they were less pleased. We don't speak anymore. I'm sorry. Don't be. It was a business relationship that ran its course. The only surprise is that it took me so long to recognize it for what it was." Liam thought about his own childhood, about the grandfather who'd taught him to fix engines and the grandmother who taught him to cook Sunday dinner. He thought about family meals where the primary currency was laughter, and the measuring stick for success was whether everyone at the table felt valued. The idea of parents who treated love like a balance sheet was so foreign to his experience that he struggled to imagine how someone survived such an upbringing. Is that why you're here? In Havenport? I mean, are you running away from them? I'm running away from a lot of things, Maya said. But mostly I'm running toward the idea that there might be something better than what I left behind. Before Liam could respond, they heard Rosie's voice calling from the driveway, announcing her return from school with the kind of enthusiasm that suggested her day had included developments worth sharing. As Maya closed her notebook and prepared to transition back into their domestic performance, Liam found himself wondering which version of their relationship was more authentic, the careful deception they performed for outside observers, or the increasingly honest conversations they had when no one else was watching. The afternoon passed in a blur of homework help and dinner preparation, with Maya and Rosie working together on a math project while Liam handled the kind of household maintenance tasks that accumulated when single parents spent more time earning money than maintaining their living spaces. Watching Maya explain long division with the patience of someone who genuinely enjoyed teaching, he was struck again by how naturally she'd adapted to their family rhythms. As evening approached, they settled into their established routine cleanup, homework review, and the extended bedtime negotiation process that Rosie had elevated to an art form. Maya had somehow become an integral part of each phase, contributing just enough structure to be helpful, without disrupting the patterns that Liam and Rosie had developed over 6 years of figuring out how to be a family of two. Maya, Rosie said as they finished reading her bedtime story, tomorrow when the lady comes to visit, are you going to tell her that you want to stay here forever? Maya glanced at Liam, and he saw the same uncertainty in her expression that he'd been feeling all day. I'm going to tell her that I care about you and your daddy very much, and that I want to be part of your family. But you do want to stay forever, right? Not just for pretend. The question hung in the air like a challenge that neither of them was prepared to meet. Liam found himself holding his breath, waiting for Maya's response and simultaneously dreading what it might reveal about the emotional complexity they'd created around their deception. I want to stay as long as you and your daddy want me here, Maya said finally, which was both an answer and a deflection that satisfied Rosie's need for reassurance without committing to anything beyond their agreed-upon timeline. After Rosie was asleep, Maya and Liam sat at the kitchen table, ostensibly reviewing their preparation for the next day's assessment, but actually avoiding the conversation that Rosie's question had made inevitable. She's getting attached, Liam said finally. I know. Tomorrow, after Jennifer Hayes leaves and we've convinced her that Rosie has a stable family environment, we're going to have to figure out how to explain to a 6-year-old why her new stepmother is disappearing. Maya stared at her hands, which were folded on the table with the kind of precise alignment that suggested she was trying to maintain control over something that felt increasingly chaotic. I've been thinking about that, she said, about what happens after tomorrow. And I think maybe we don't have to figure it out all at once. Maybe we can take things one day at a time and see what feels right. Liam studied her expression, trying to determine whether she was suggesting what he thought she was suggesting. Maya, you know I can't offer you anything real. I'm broke. I'm barely keeping my life together, and I have no idea what I'm doing most of the time. What if I told you that those aren't the things I'm looking for? What are you looking for? Maya was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice carried the kind of vulnerability that suggested she was taking a risk she wasn't sure she could afford. I'm looking for someone who thinks I'm worth more than what I can do for them. I'm looking for a place where my value isn't measured by my productivity or my potential for generating profit. I'm looking for a family that wants me because of who I am, not because of what I have. And you think you might find that here? I think I might have already found it. As they sat there in the quiet kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of their elaborate deception and the reality of their growing connection, Liam realized that tomorrow's assessment with Jennifer Hayes was no longer just about convincing a social worker that Rosie had a stable family environment. It was about figuring out whether the family they'd created as performance might be worth turning into something real. Friday morning arrived with a kind of crystalline autumn clarity that made every detail of Havenport stand out in sharp relief. The weathered shingles on the harbor cottages, the last stubborn leaves clinging to the oak trees, and the nervous energy radiating from Liam as he checked and rechecked their apartment for any detail that might betray the carefully constructed fiction of their engagement. Maya found Rosie's hand-drawn family picture taped to the refrigerator at eye level, a crayon masterpiece that showed 3 stick figures holding hands outside a house that looked suspiciously like their apartment building. In the drawing, the tallest figure wore what appeared to be coveralls and had an enormous smile. The smallest figure had curly hair and held what might have been a hermit crab, and the middle figure, clearly meant to be Maya, wore a dress and had been colored with the kind of meticulous attention to detail that suggested Rosie had spent considerable time getting the proportions exactly right. What struck Maya most was the title. Rosie had written across the top of the page in her careful first-grade printing, "My Family" by Rosie Callahan. Not "My Dad and Me and Maya," not "The People Who Live in My House," but "My Family," with the kind of absolute certainty that only children possessed. "She drew that yesterday while you were at work," Liam said, appearing beside Maya, with 2 cups of coffee and the kind of nervous energy that suggested he'd been awake since before dawn. "I found her working on it after dinner, using every crayon in her box to get your hair color exactly right." Maya touched the edge of the drawing, careful not to disturb the tape that held it in place. "She put me in the middle. That's where she thinks you belong." The simple statement carried more weight than either of them was prepared to acknowledge directly. In Rosie's drawing, Maya wasn't an addition to an existing family unit. She was the center around which the family was organized, the connecting point that made the 3 of them a cohesive whole. "Liam," Maya said, still studying the drawing, "what are we going to tell her if this doesn't work? If Jennifer Hayes sees through our performance and decides that Rosie needs a more stable environment?" "I don't know," he admitted. "I've been trying not to think about that possibility." "And what are we going to tell her if it does work?" Liam was quiet for a moment, and Maya could sense him struggling with the same questions that had kept her awake for most of the night. "I don't know that either." Before either of them could explore the implications of their mutual uncertainty, Rosie emerged from her bedroom wearing her favorite dress, a blue jumper with small flowers that Maya had helped her choose because it was fancy enough for important company, but comfortable enough for a regular day. She'd attempted to French braid her own hair, using the technique Maya had taught her, with results that were endearingly lopsided but showed genuine effort. "Do I look like someone who has a good family?" Rosie asked, performing a small twirl that made her dress flare out like a bell. "You look like someone who is loved very much," Maya said, kneeling down to adjust Rosie's braid with a kind of gentle precision that had become second nature over the past week. "And that's the most important thing of all." "Maya, are you nervous about today?" Maya paused in her hair fixing, struck by the directness of the question and the genuine concern in Rosie's expression. "A little bit, are you?" "A little bit too. But Daddy says that being nervous just means something is important to you. And family is the most important thing in the whole world. So it makes sense that we're all nervous." "Your daddy is very wise." "I know," Rosie said with the matter-of-fact confidence of someone stating an obvious truth. "That's why I drew him with such a big smile in my picture. Happy daddies are the best kind." After breakfast, they went through their final preparations with the kind of methodical attention to detail that Maya had learned to associate with high-stakes business presentations. Every surface in the apartment had been cleaned and organized. Every piece of evidence of their relationship had been strategically placed to seem natural rather than deliberate. And every aspect of their family story had been rehearsed until they could recite it with convincing spontaneity. Maya had dressed carefully for the assessment, choosing clothes that suggested stability and sophistication without implying wealth. That might raise questions about why she was willing to marry a struggling mechanic. She wore dark jeans, a cream-colored sweater, and minimal jewelry, except for the engagement ring that had belonged to Liam's grandmother. A simple gold band with a small diamond that had been cleaned and polished until it caught the morning light like a promise. "Are you ready for this?" Liam asked as they waited for Jennifer Hayes to arrive. "As ready as anyone can be for performing the most important lie of their life," Maya replied, then immediately regretted the word choice when she saw Liam's expression shift. "Is that what this is to you? A performance?" Maya looked around the apartment they'd transformed into evidence of their shared life, the photos they'd created, the belongings she'd strategically placed, the domestic routines they'd established, and realized that somewhere in the process of constructing their elaborate deception, the line between performance and reality had become uncomfortably blurred. "I don't know anymore," she said honestly. "Do you?" Before Liam could answer, they heard the sound of a car door closing in the parking lot below. Through the window, Maya could see Jennifer Hayes walking toward their building with the purposeful stride of someone who approached every task with professional efficiency. She carried the same clipboard and briefcase from her previous visit, but today she was accompanied by a second woman older, with gray hair and the kind of expression that suggested she'd spent decades evaluating family situations and had seen everything worth seeing. "She brought backup," Liam observed, his voice tight with new anxiety. "Or supervision," Maya said. "Either way, we stick to our story." The knock on their door was firm, but not aggressive, a kind of professional announcement that preceded conversations no one particularly wanted to have. Liam answered with the nervous smile of someone trying to appear welcoming while simultaneously terrified of the outcome. And Maya positioned herself beside him with what she hoped looked like natural spousal support rather than coached solidarity. "Mr. Callahan," Jennifer Hayes said, stepping into their apartment with the practiced eye of someone accustomed to reading living spaces for signs of stability or dysfunction. "This is Dr. Patricia Vance, our family assessment supervisor. She be observing today's evaluation." Dr. Vance was smaller than Maya had expected, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of their apartment with the kind of methodical attention that suggested she missed very little. When she shook hands with Maya, her grip was firm and her gaze direct in a way that made Maya feel like she was being x-rayed for inconsistencies. "Ms. Linwood," Dr. Vance said, and Maya was grateful that they'd prepared for the possibility that Jennifer Hayes might have done additional research on her background. "I understand you're planning to marry Mr. Callahan and become part of Rosie's family." "That's right," Maya said, slipping her hand into Liam's with what she hoped looked like unconscious affection rather than calculated performance. "We're very excited about building a life together. And where is Rosie now?" "She's at school," Liam said, "but she'll be home in about an hour. We thought you might want to speak with us first, and then talk to her in a more familiar environment." Jennifer Hayes nodded approvingly and began arranging her materials on their dining room table while Dr. Vance continued her visual inventory of their living space. Maya watched the older woman's gaze linger on the family photos, the evidence of shared meals, and the small domestic details that suggested two separate lives in the process of becoming one. "Tell me about your relationship," Dr. Vance said, settling into one of their kitchen chairs with the expectation of a lengthy conversation. "How did you meet, and what made you decide to get married?" Maya and Liam launched into their carefully rehearsed story, taking turns with the kind of easy back and forth that suggested they'd told the story many times before. They described the flat tire that had brought Maya to Liam's garage, the immediate attraction that had surprised both of them, and the gradual courtship that had allowed Maya to become part of Rosie's life before they'd made any permanent commitments. "It was important to me that Rosie approve of anyone I was serious about," Liam said, reaching over to squeeze Maya's hand in a gesture that felt genuine despite being performed for an audience. "She's been through enough changes in her life. I wasn't going to add someone new to our family unless I was certain it would make things better for her, not just easier for me." "And how did Rosie react to Maya?" Dr. Vance asked. "Like she'd been waiting for her," Liam said, and Maya was struck by how much truth he managed to pack into their fictional narrative. From the first day they met, it was like Maya had always been part of our family. Rosie started talking about when Maya moves in, before Maya and I had even discussed the possibility. Dr. Vance made notes with the kind of careful attention that suggested she was recording not just their words, but her assessment of their credibility. "Maya, what attracted you to this relationship? You're clearly an educated woman with professional opportunities. What made you want to take on the responsibility of instant motherhood in a small town?" The question was more pointed than Maya had expected, and she could sense both Jennifer Hayes and Dr. Vance watching her response with particular interest. This was the moment when their carefully constructed story would either hold together or fall apart under scrutiny. "I've never wanted children of my own," Maya said, drawing on a truth that made the rest of her answer more convincing. "But spending time with Rosie made me realize that I didn't want children because I'd never met a child. I could imagine loving unconditionally. Rosie changed that. And watching Liam as a father, seeing how he puts her needs before everything else, how he's built his entire life around making sure she feels safe and valued, that's when I knew I wanted to be part of something that important." "And the financial aspects?" Dr. Vance pressed. "Mr. Callahan's income is barely above poverty level, and he's carrying significant debt from Rosie's medical emergency. Are you prepared to take on those responsibilities?" "Money has never been my primary concern," Maya said, which was perhaps the most honest thing she'd said all day. "I have savings that will help stabilize their situation, and I can work remotely from here. But more importantly, I've never been part of a family that measured success by love instead of bank balances. That's worth more to me than financial security." Dr. Vance and Jennifer Hayes exchanged a look that Maya couldn't interpret. But before either of them could ask follow-up questions, they heard the sound of small feet running up the stairs. Rosie burst through the door with the enthusiasm of someone who'd been looking forward to this moment all day, still wearing her carefully chosen dress and carrying a backpack that appeared to be overflowing with art projects. "Maya, Daddy," she called, launching herself at them with the kind of physical affection that couldn't be coached or faked. "I made something at school for the important ladies." Maya caught Rosie in a hug that felt as natural as breathing, and she was struck by how right it felt to be the person this child ran to for comfort and excitement. Over Rosie's head, she caught Liam's eye and saw something there that went beyond gratitude for her performance, something that looked like genuine affection mixed with the kind of wonder that suggested he was as surprised as she was by how authentic their fictional family had become. "What did you make?" Maya asked, helping Rosie extract her latest artistic creation from her backpack. "I made a book about our family," Rosie announced, producing a construction paper booklet held together with yarn and decorated with the kind of elaborate illustrations that only first graders attempted. "It has pictures of all the things we do together, and I wrote words to explain why we're a good family." Dr. Vance accepted the book with a kind of serious attention that suggested she understood the significance of Rosie's gesture. As she flipped through the pages, Maya could see hand-drawn pictures of their morning routines, their evening dinners, and their weekend adventures to the tide pools. Each illustration was accompanied by Rosie's careful printing. Maya makes the best pancakes. Daddy teaches us about cars. We help each other with everything. This is very impressive, Rosie, Dr. Vance said. Can you tell me about this picture? She pointed to a drawing that showed 3 figures working together in what appeared to be the garage. That's when Maya helped me and Daddy fix Mrs. Patterson's car, Rosie explained. Maya held the flashlight, and I handed Daddy the tools, and Mrs. Patterson said we looked like a real family working together. Maya says that families are people who help each other, even when it's hard work. Maya felt her throat tighten at the innocent pride in Rosie's voice. The child had absorbed their week of domestic performance and transformed it into evidence of belonging, proof that the 3 of them functioned as a unit in ways that went beyond convenient arrangement. And how do you feel about Maya becoming your stepmother? Jennifer Hayes asked. Rosie considered this question with a kind of serious attention she usually reserved for complex math problems. I feel like she already is my stepmother, just without the wedding part yet. She takes care of me when I'm sad, and she helps me with homework, and she knows all my favorite things. Plus, she loves Daddy the way mommies are supposed to love daddies, and she loves me the way mommies are supposed to love kids. How do you know she loves your daddy the right way? Dr. Vance asked, and Maya held her breath, wondering how a 6-year-old would answer a question that she and Liam had been carefully avoiding. Because she looks at him the same way he looks at me, Rosie said with a devastating honesty that children wielded like weapons they didn't know they carried. Like he's the most important person in the whole world, and she wants to take care of him forever. Maya felt Liam's hand tighten around hers, and she realized that Rosie's observation was more accurate than their carefully constructed story had intended. Somewhere in the process of learning to perform love for an audience, she had started to feel something that went beyond performance, something that made the idea of leaving after today feel like abandoning the most important thing she'd ever found. The assessment continued for another hour, with Dr. Vance and Jennifer Hayes asking questions about everything from their future living arrangements to their plans for Rosie's education and medical care. Maya and Liam answered with the kind of coordinated responses that suggested they'd spent considerable time discussing these topics, while Rosie provided commentary that revealed how thoroughly she'd accepted Maya as a permanent member of their family. When the evaluation finally concluded, Dr. Vance closed her notebook with the kind of decisive movement that suggested she'd reached her conclusions. Mr. Callahan, she said, I want to commend you on the progress you've made in addressing the concerns we raised last week. The addition of a stable partner with financial resources significantly improves Rosie's family environment, and it's clear that all 3 of you have formed genuine emotional bonds. Maya felt Liam's relief like a physical presence in the room, and she realized she was holding her own breath, waiting for the final verdict. However, Dr. Vance continued, I do have some questions about the timing of your engagement. Ms. Linwood, you've known this family for less than 2 months, and you're prepared to take on significant financial obligations and parental responsibilities. That level of commitment in such a short time frame raises some concerns about the long-term stability of this arrangement. The question Maya had been dreading had finally arrived, and she found herself faced with a choice between maintaining their carefully constructed fiction and telling a truth that might be more convincing than any lie they could invent. Dr. Vance, she said, making a decision that felt both terrifying and inevitable. Sometimes sometimes you meet people who change everything you thought you understood about your own life. And the only choice that makes sense is to trust that feeling and build something real around it. I've never been more certain of anything than I am about wanting to be part of this family. As she spoke, Maya realized that she was no longer performing for an audience of social workers. She was telling the truth about feelings she'd been afraid to acknowledge, even to herself, and the relief of honesty was almost overwhelming. Dr. Vance studied Maya's expression for a long moment. then made a final note in her file. "I'll be recommending that Rosie remain in her father's custody," she said. "This family environment meets all our requirements for stability and support. However, I'll be scheduling a follow-up visit in 3 months to ensure that these arrangements are working as intended for everyone involved." After the social workers left, the three of them sat in their living room, surrounded by the evidence of their successful performance. But Maya found herself wondering whether their victory felt hollow because it had been based on deception, or whether it felt overwhelming because somewhere in the process of pretending to be a family, they had actually become one. The celebration dinner that evening was supposed to mark the end of their elaborate deception, but instead it felt like the beginning of something none of them knew how to name. Maya had insisted on cooking a gesture that felt both generous and domestic in ways that made Liam's chest tight with emotions he wasn't ready to examine. Rosie had appointed herself sous chef, chattering about her day at school while carefully setting the table with the kind of meticulous attention to detail she'd inherited from her father Dot as they worked together in the small kitchen. Liam found himself cataloging moments that felt too precious to be temporary. Maya humming softly as she stirred pasta sauce, Rosie standing on a step stool to reach the spice cabinet. The easy way they moved around each other in the limited space, as if they'd been cooking together for years rather than days. The domesticity was intoxicating in ways that frightened him. "Daddy," Rosie said as she arranged napkins with geometric precision, "now that the important ladies said I can stay with you forever, when are you and Maya going to have your real wedding?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a fire. Neither of them had noticed starting. Liam caught Maya's eye across the kitchen, and he saw his own uncertainty reflected in her expression. They'd spent so much energy preparing for the assessment that they hadn't discussed what would happen afterward, how they would untangle their fictional engagement without breaking Rosie's heart. "Well, sweetheart," Liam said carefully, "Maya and I still have some things to figure out." "What kind of things?" Maya turned from the stove, and Liam was struck by how natural she looked in his kitchen, how right it seemed to have her there stirring his grandmother's recipe for marinara sauce, while his daughter peppered them with questions about their future. "Important things," Maya said, which wasn't really an answer, but was delivered with enough gentle authority to satisfy Rosie's immediate curiosity. After dinner, as they settled into their evening routine of homework and bedtime stories, Liam noticed that Maya seemed to be paying extra attention to each small ritual, as if she was trying to memorize details she might not experience again. She helped Rosie with her reading homework with the kind of patient attention that suggested teaching came naturally to her, and she listened to Rosie's elaborate bedtime prayers with the respectful focus of someone who understood that children's spiritual lives deserved serious consideration. "Maya," Rosie said, as Maya was tucking her into bed, "are you going to sleep in Daddy's room tonight, like you have been all week?" Maya glanced toward the doorway where Liam was standing, and he saw something flicker across her expression uncertainty. Maybe, or the kind of hesitation that came from realizing that their sleeping arrangements had been one more element of their performance that would need to be addressed now that the performance was supposedly over. "We'll see," Maya said, smoothing Rosie's hair with the kind of gentle gesture that had become second nature over the past week. "Sweet dreams, little one." After Rosie was asleep, Maya and Liam found themselves alone in the living room for the first time since their assessment had ended. The silence between them felt charged with everything they hadn't discussed, all the questions that successful completion of their deception had made urgent rather than theoretical. Liam's grandfather's toolbox sat on the coffee table where he'd left it that morning, a reminder of the sacrifice he'd been prepared to make before Maya had entered their lives and changed everything. The tools inside represented 3 generations of Callahan men who'd built their livelihoods with their hands, who'd measured success by the problems they could solve and the things they could fix. Looking at it now, Liam realized that some problems couldn't be solved with mechanical expertise. "You saved us today," he said, settling onto the couch beside Maya with careful attention to the space between them. I don't know how to thank you. For that, you don't need to thank me. Yes, I do. You spent a week of your life helping a stranger navigate a crisis that wasn't your responsibility. You convinced a social worker that we were building a real life together, and you did it so convincingly that I almost believed it myself. Maya looked down at her hands, which were folded in her lap with the kind of precise alignment that suggested she was trying to maintain control over something that felt increasingly chaotic. What if I told you that it wasn't entirely acting? What do you mean? I mean that somewhere in the process of pretending to be part of your family, I started to feel like I actually belonged here. I started to care about you and Rosie in ways that go beyond helping you solve a temporary problem. Liam felt his heart rate accelerate in the way that usually preceded either very good news or very bad news. Maya, I know it's complicated, she said quickly, as if she needed to get the words out before she lost her courage. I know you asked me to help you with a specific problem, not to develop feelings for your family. And I know that my life is more complex than I've been willing to explain. But spending this week with you and Rosie has been the most real thing I've experienced in years. More real than your life in technology consulting? Maya's laugh was the kind that didn't contain any humor. Liam, I haven't been entirely honest with you about my work situation. I figured as much. Technology consulting seemed a little vague for someone who carries an encrypted laptop and gets urgent phone calls at dawn. I don't work in technology consulting, Maya said, and something in her tone suggested she was about to reveal information. That would change the nature of their conversation entirely. I own a technology company, a large one. And for the past week, while I've been here playing house with you and Rosie, my business has been falling apart in ways that could affect thousands of people. Liam stared at her, processing this information and trying to reconcile the woman who'd spent the morning convincing social workers of their domestic stability with the image of someone who owned a large enough company to employ thousands of people. How large? He asked. Large enough that my unexpected absence has triggered a hostile takeover attempt by a competitor who's been looking for an opportunity to acquire my company for less than it's worth. And you've been here instead of dealing with that because for the first time in my adult life, I found something that mattered more than business obligations and profit margins. Maya looked directly at him, and her expression held the kind of vulnerability that suggested she was taking the biggest risk of her life. Because I found a family that wanted me for who I am, not for what I can provide or what I can do for them. Liam felt the weight of this revelation settling around him like fog. Maya wasn't just a successful professional who'd been willing to help him navigate a custody crisis. She was someone whose resources and responsibilities operated on a scale he couldn't begin to comprehend. Someone who'd abandoned significant obligations to help him create a fictional family that had somehow become more real than either of them had intended. Maya, if your company is under attack, you need to go handle that. You can't sacrifice your life's work for what? For a relationship that's been pretend from the beginning? That's not what I was going to say. Then what were you going to say? Liam looked around their small living room, taking in the evidence of the week they'd spent building something that felt like a life together. The photos Maya had created of their fictional courtship, the domestic routines they'd established, the easy intimacy they'd developed while learning to perform love for an audience. All of it had felt more authentic than most of his real relationships. I was going to say that you can't sacrifice your life's work for someone who doesn't have anything to offer you in return. What if I don't want you to offer me anything? What if I just want you to let me stay? The question was simple and complex in equal measure, and Liam found himself struggling with emotions that felt too large for their small apartment. The idea that someone like Maya, successful, sophisticated, capable of commanding resources, he couldn't imagine would want to stay in his modest life was simultaneously flattering and terrifying. Maya, I drive a 15-year-old pickup truck and live above a garage that barely pays the bills. My idea of a luxury vacation is taking Rosie to the state fair. I don't know anything about hostile takeovers or corporate responsibility or the kind of life you're accustomed to living. And I don't know anything about fixing cars or raising children or the kind of contentment that comes from building something real with your hands. Maya shifted on the couch, turning to face him more directly. But I know that I've never been happier than I've been this week, pretending to be part of your family. I know that helping Rosie with her homework feels more important than any business deal I've ever closed. And I know that the thought of going back to my real life feels like volunteering for a prison sentence. But your company will survive or it won't. And if it doesn't, maybe that's not the worst thing that could happen to me. Liam studied Maya's expression, looking for signs that she was making an impulsive decision based on the emotional intensity of their week together. But her eyes held the kind of determined clarity that suggested she'd thought through the implications of what she was saying. Are you sure you're not just running away from something difficult? I'm sure I'm running toward something better. Before Liam could respond, they heard a small voice from the direction of Rosie's bedroom. Daddy? Maya? I can't sleep. They found Rosie sitting up in bed, her hair tousled and her expression worried in the way that suggested she'd been lying. Awake thinking about things that were too big for 6-year-old minds to process easily. What's wrong, sweetheart? Liam asked, settling on the edge of her bed while Maya perched in the small chair beside her dresser. I keep thinking about what happens next, Rosie said. The important ladies said I can stay with you forever, but they didn't say anything about Maya. What if Maya decides she doesn't want to be part of our family anymore? Liam glanced at Maya, and he saw his own emotional complexity reflected in her expression. They'd spent the week convincing everyone, including themselves, that their fictional family was real, but they hadn't prepared for the moment when they'd have to decide whether it could become permanent. Rosie, Maya said carefully, what would you think if I told you that I wanted to stay here with you and your daddy for a very long time? Like forever? Like we'd take it one day at a time and see how it goes. Rosie considered this with the kind of serious attention she usually reserved for important decisions about ice cream flavors or bedtime stories. I think that sounds perfect, because families don't have to be forever all at once. They can be forever one day at a time until it adds up to actually forever. After they'd settled Rosie back to sleep, Maya and Liam returned to the living room, but the conversation felt different now. Rosie's innocent wisdom had reframed their situation in ways that made the complexity feel manageable rather than overwhelming. One day at a time, Liam said. One day at a time, Maya agreed. But first you need to deal with your company situation. You can't just abandon your responsibilities and pretend they don't exist. Maya pulled out her phone and stared at the screen, which showed 17 missed calls and 43 unread messages. You're right. But I want you to know that whatever happens with the business, my priorities have changed. This family, you and Rosie, that's what matters most to me now. And I want you to know that if you decide to stay, it won't be because I need you to solve our problems. It'll be because we want you here, because you make our family better in ways that have nothing to do with financial stability or social worker assessments. Maya looked around the apartment they'd shared for a week, taking in the evidence of their domestic experiment and the life they'd built together while pretending it wasn't real. Tomorrow I need to make some phone calls and probably take a trip to handle the business crisis, she said. But when that's settled, one way or another, I'd like to come back here and see if we can figure out how to make this work for real. Are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything. As they prepared for what might be their last night sharing the same space, Liam found himself hoping that Maya's confidence was justified, that the feelings they developed during their week of performance could survive the transition to reality. But he also found himself worried about what it would mean for Maya to give up the life she'd built in order to join the life he was still figuring out how to live. Some bridges, once crossed, couldn't be uncrossed. Some decisions, once made, changed everything that came after. Looking at Maya as she gathered her belongings and prepared to face whatever crisis was waiting for her in the outside world, Liam realized that they were both about to find out whether love that began as performance could evolve into something worth building a real life around. Maya left before dawn on Saturday morning, but not before quietly placing an envelope on Liam's kitchen counter with his name written in her precise handwriting. Inside, he found a check made out to Liam Callahan in an amount that made him double-check the numbers twice before he could fully process what he was seeing. $25,000, enough to pay off every medical bill, catch up on rent, and still have money left over for the kind of financial security he'd been chasing since Rosie was born. Attached to the check was a note written on expensive stationery that somehow made her words feel more formal than the intimate conversations they'd shared over the past week. This isn't charity, and it's not payment for services rendered. It's what families do for each other when they have the resources to help. Please don't let pride prevent you from accepting what you've already given me, the chance to be part of something real. I'll call you tonight. Liam stared at the check for a long time, sitting at his kitchen table in the early morning light while Rosie slept peacefully in the next room. The money represented more than financial relief. It represented a level of generosity that most people couldn't afford, and a level of trust that suggested Maya viewed their relationship as something worth investing in literally as well as emotionally. But it also raised questions that made his coffee taste bitter. How wealthy was Maya if she could write a $25,000 check without apparently straining her resources? What kind of technology company generated the kind of profits that made such gestures possible? And why had she been so evasive about the specifics of her professional life if she had nothing to hide? By the time Rosie woke up and discovered that Maya had left to handle important business things, Liam had worked himself into the kind of anxious spiral that came from having too many questions and not enough information. Rosie's disappointment at Maya's absence was palpable, but she accepted his explanation that Maya would be back soon with the kind of trusting faith that children reserved for adults who hadn't yet given them reasons to doubt. Did she say when she's coming back? Rosie asked over breakfast, picking at her cereal with the listless attention of someone whose appetite had been affected by worry. She said she'd call tonight and let us know how things are going. Do you think she's okay? She seemed sad when she said goodbye. Liam thought about the expression on Maya's face as she'd hugged them both before leaving, determined but troubled, as if she was heading into a situation that might not have a happy resolution. I think she's dealing with some difficult problems at work, he said carefully. But Maya is very smart and very capable. I'm sure she'll figure out how to handle whatever's wrong. The day passed with the kind of restless energy that came from waiting for news that might or might not be good. Liam tried to maintain their normal Saturday routine: breakfast, cartoons, a trip to the harbor to check on the hermit crab's butt. His attention kept drifting to his phone, waiting for Maya's promised call. It wasn't until early evening, as he was helping Rosie with a jigsaw puzzle, that his phone finally rang with Maya's number on the caller. ID, how are things going? He asked, stepping into the kitchen for privacy, while Rosie continued working on a particularly challenging section of puzzle pieces. Worse than I expected, Maya said, and her voice carried a weariness that suggested she'd been dealing with crisis management for most of the day. The hostile takeover is more advanced than my team initially realized, and there are some complications that I didn't anticipate. What kind of complications? Maya was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again, her tone was careful in a way that suggested she was choosing her words deliberately. Liam, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Okay, Have you told anyone about our arrangement? About the fact that our engagement was originally fake? The question caught him off guard. No, of course not. Why would you ask that? Because someone leaked information about my whereabouts and my personal situation to my business competitors. Information that could only have come from someone who knew about our relationship and the circumstances that brought us together. Liam felt something cold settle in his stomach. What kind of information? Details about you and Rosie, about the custody evaluation, about the fact that I've been living in your apartment for the past week. Someone provided enough personal information to make it clear that I've been ... compromised. Compromised how? The narrative they're spreading is that I've been having some kind of personal breakdown, that I've abandoned my business responsibilities to play house with a small-town mechanic and his daughter. They're using our relationship as evidence that I'm no longer competent to run my company. Liam felt the blood drain from his face as the implications of what Maya was describing became clear. Maya, I swear to you, I haven't told anyone. Not Mrs. Patterson, not anyone at the garage, nobody. I believe you, she said quickly, but someone talked. Someone who knew enough details about our situation to make the story credible. As Maya spoke, Liam found himself thinking about the people who'd been in their apartment during the past week, who'd witnessed their domestic performance and heard their carefully constructed story about their engagement. The list was very short, but it included 2 people who'd had professional reasons to investigate their relationship thoroughly. Maya, he said slowly, what if it wasn't someone from my end who leaked the information? What if it was someone from the social services evaluation? What do you mean? Jennifer Hayes and Dr. Vance had access to all kinds of personal information about both of us. They knew our financial situation, our living arrangements, the timeline of our relationship, and they would have had professional reasons to verify the information we gave them. Maya was quiet for a long moment, and Liam could almost hear her processing this possibility. You think one of the social workers sold information about our personal lives to my business competitors? I think someone who had access to detailed information about your identity and our relationship shared that information with people who could use it against you. And the most likely candidates are the people whose job it was to investigate our family situation. But why would they do that? Money, Liam said grimly. If your company is valuable enough to be worth a hostile takeover, then information that could help the takeover succeed would be worth paying for. The silence that followed was filled with the kind of tension that came from realizing that their carefully constructed deception had been penetrated in ways they hadn't anticipated, and that the consequences extended far beyond their personal relationship. There's something else, Maya said finally. The people trying to take over my company, they're not just using the information about our relationship to question my competence. They're threatening to expose our arrangement publicly, to reveal that our engagement was fake and that you've been struggling financially. They're basically threatening to destroy your reputation and your custody situation unless I agree to their terms. Liam felt the world tilt sideways. They're threatening Rosie? They're threatening to go public with information that could trigger another social services investigation, this time based on evidence that you constructed an elaborate deception to fool the system. Even if you ultimately retained custody, the process would be traumatic for Rosie, and the publicity would be devastating for your business and your standing in the community. So what are our options? I can give them what they want, agree to sell the company for less than it's worth, and accept their terms for the transition. That would make the information about our relationship irrelevant to their business objectives, so they'd have no reason to make it public. And if you don't, then they destroy both of our lives as a warning to anyone else who might consider standing in their way. Liam sat down heavily at his kitchen table, staring at Maya's check and thinking about the irony of their situation. The money she'd given him to solve his financial problems had become irrelevant in the face of threats that went far beyond anything he could have imagined when he'd first asked her to pretend to be his fiancée. Maya, You can't sacrifice your company to protect me and Rosie. That's not what families do. Isn't it? Maya's voice was soft, but determined. Isn't that exactly what you were prepared to do when you pawned your grandfather's tools to buy Rosie school shoes? Isn't that what you've been doing every day since she was born, sacrificing everything you wanted for yourself to give her what she needed? That's different. She's my daughter. This is your life's work, and you and Rosie are my family. Or at least, I hope you are. Liam closed his eyes, feeling the weight of impossible choices settling around him like a net. There has to be another way. If there is, I haven't found it yet. I've got the best lawyers and business advisors that money can buy working on this. But the reality is that they have leverage over both of us now. They know that I care more about protecting you and Rosie than I care about protecting my business interests. What's the timeline? They want an answer by Monday morning. If I don't agree to their terms by then, they'll start releasing information to the media and filing complaints with social services. After Maya hung up, Liam sat in his kitchen for a long time, staring at the check that was supposed to solve his problems but had somehow created much bigger ones. Through the doorway, he could see Rosie working on her puzzle, humming quietly to herself with the contentment of someone who believed that the adults in her life had everything under control. Irony wasn't lost on him. For the first time in 6 years, he'd found someone who made him believe that his small life could be enough, that love and commitment could matter more than financial success or social status. And now that same relationship was threatening to destroy everything he'd worked to build for Rosie. Sunday morning brought unexpected visitors. Liam was making pancakes, the kind with chocolate chips that Rosie preferred, and that Maya had declared superior to Mrs. Patterson's recipe, when he heard the sound of multiple car doors closing in his parking lot. Through the window, he watched Jennifer Hayes and Dr. Vance walking toward his apartment building, accompanied by a man in an expensive suit who looked distinctly out of place in Havenport's casual environment. "Daddy," Rosie said, appearing at his elbow with a kind of worried expression that suggested she'd also seen their unexpected guests. "Why are the important ladies back? Did we do something wrong?" "I don't think so, sweetheart." "But why don't you go play in your room while I talk to them?" The knock on his door was more aggressive than Jennifer Hayes's usual professional announcement, and when Liam opened it, he could see tension in both women's expressions that hadn't been there during Friday's assessment. "Mr. Callahan," Jennifer Hayes said, "we need to discuss some new information that's come to our attention regarding your custody situation." The man in the suit stepped forward with the kind of predatory confidence that Liam had learned to associate with people who viewed other people's problems as business opportunities. "I'm Richard Morrison," he said, extending a business card that identified him as a private investigator. "I represent certain parties who have concerns about the authenticity of your recent family assessment." Liam felt his stomach drop, but he maintained what he hoped was a neutral expression. "I'm not sure what you mean. We have evidence that your engagement to Ms. Maya Linwood was fabricated specifically to influence the outcome of your custody evaluation," Morrison said, consulting a tablet that apparently contained detailed information about Liam's personal life. "We have documentation of Ms. Linwood's real identity, her reasons for being in Havenport, and the financial arrangements that motivated your deception." Dr. Vance looked genuinely distressed by these revelations. "Mr. Callahan, if these allegations are true, you've committed fraud against the state social services system. The penalties for that kind of deception include immediate removal of the child from the home and potential criminal charges." But more importantly, Morrison continued with the kind of satisfaction that suggested he enjoyed delivering bad news. "We're prepared to make this information public unless certain conditions are met." "What conditions?" Liam asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Ms. Linwood needs to understand that her personal choices have consequences that extend beyond her own life. If she wants to protect your family situation and your reputation in this community, she needs to be more cooperative regarding certain business negotiations. The threat was barely veiled, and Liam found himself facing the same impossible choice that Maya had described during their phone conversation. Either she sacrificed her company to protect him and Rosie, or they all suffered the consequences of their elaborate deception being exposed. "How long do I have to think about this?" Liam asked. "You don't," Morrison said. "Ms. Linwood has until tomorrow morning to make her decision. If she chooses to prioritize her business interests over your family's welfare, then we'll be filing a formal complaint with social services and releasing our information to the local media by noon tomorrow." After they left, Liam called Maya immediately, but her phone went straight to voicemail. He tried her office number, but was told by an assistant that Ms. Linwood was in meetings and couldn't be disturbed. The sense of isolation was overwhelming. He was facing the potential destruction of his family, and the one person who might be able to help him navigate the crisis was unreachable. It wasn't until late Sunday evening that Maya finally called back, and her voice carried the kind of exhaustion that suggested she'd been dealing with crisis management for most of the weekend. "They came to see me too," Liam said before she could speak, "with the same ultimatum. Sacrifice your company or watch them destroy our family. I know. Richard Morrison is very thorough in his intimidation techniques. Maya, you can't give them what they want. Your company represents years of work, probably thousands of jobs. You can't throw all of that away because I was stupid enough to ask you to help me lie to social services. And you can't lose Rosie because you were desperate enough to try anything to keep your family together." Maya's voice was steady, but Liam could hear the strain beneath her professional composure. "Besides, there's something you don't know about my company, something that makes this decision more complicated than it appears." "What do you mean?" "My company isn't just a technology business, Liam. It's a philanthropic foundation that operates through technology platforms. We fund educational programs, provide microloans to small businesses, and support community development projects in rural areas. The foundation that's been quietly funding half of Havenport's school programs for the past 3 years, that's my company." Liam felt the breath leave his lungs. "You've been funding Rosie's school?" "I've been funding a lot of things in this community, anonymously and through intermediaries. When I decided to take a break from corporate life and hide out in a small coastal town, I chose Havenport specifically because it was one of our project communities. I wanted to see firsthand how our programs were working. So when you helped me fix that flat tire, I was already invested in this community's welfare. Helping you was personal, but it was also professional in ways I didn't feel comfortable explaining." The revelation reframed everything Liam thought he understood about Maya's motivations and their relationship. She hadn't been a wealthy tourist who'd stumbled into their lives by accident. She'd been someone with genuine ties to their community, someone whose professional responsibilities included caring about the welfare of families like his. "Maya, if you lose your company, what happens to all those programs? What happens to communities like Havenport that depend on your foundation's support? They find other funding sources, or they learn to do without. And the people whose jobs depend on your company staying independent? They find new jobs, or they work for whoever acquires the company and hope for the best." Liam closed his eyes, feeling the weight of decisions that affected far more people than just him and Rosie. "This isn't just about us anymore, is it? It never was just about us. But that doesn't change how I feel about you and Rosie, and it doesn't change my commitment to protecting this family we've built together. Even if it means sacrificing everything else you've worked for, even then." As they said goodbye, both of them knowing that tomorrow would bring consequences that would change everything, Liam realized that their story had evolved far beyond a simple deception designed to fool the social worker. They were facing a choice between personal happiness and public responsibility, between protecting the family they'd created and preserving the work that served communities like theirs, The anonymous donation check that Maya had left on his kitchen counter suddenly felt like evidence of a much larger truth, that wealth carried obligations that went beyond personal desires, and that love sometimes meant making sacrifices that protected more than just the people you cared about most. Tomorrow morning, Maya would have to choose between the life she'd built and the life she wanted. And whatever she decided, Liam knew that he and Rosie would have to live with the consequences of a deception that had started as an act of desperation and evolved into something that neither of them had been prepared to handle. Some lies became true through repetition, but some truths, once revealed, changed everything that came after in ways that couldn't be undone. Monday morning arrived with the kind of gray coastal weather that made Havenport look like a town suspended between seasons, not quite autumn, not yet winter, but caught in the liminal space where everything felt uncertain and temporary. Liam had been awake since 3 a.m., alternating between staring at his ceiling and checking his phone for messages from Maya that never came dot by dawn. The silence had become unbearable. He'd tried calling her twice, but both attempts had gone straight to voicemail, suggesting that her phone was either turned off or she was deliberately avoiding contact until, after whatever confrontation awaited her this morning, the isolation was worse than the fear. At least fear was an emotion he could process, but helplessness felt like drowning in slow motion. Rosie emerged from her bedroom at her usual time, still wearing the pajamas that Maya had helped her choose last week and carrying the teddy bear that had been her constant companion since infancy. She moved through her morning routine with a kind of subdued energy that suggested she sensed the tension in their apartment even if she didn't understand its source. "Is Maya coming back today?" she asked over breakfast, picking at her cereal, with the listless attention of someone whose appetite had been affected by worry that she couldn't name. "I hope so, sweetheart," Liam said, which was both completely honest and utterly inadequate as reassurance. "She said she'd be back as soon as her important business was finished." "Do you think her important business is harder than she expected?" Liam thought about corporate takeovers and private investigators and ultimatums that demanded impossible choices between personal happiness and professional responsibility. "I think Maya is dealing with some very difficult problems that don't have easy solutions. Maybe we could help her. We're good at solving problems together." The innocent confidence in Rosie's voice made Liam's chest tight with emotions he couldn't afford to examine too closely. His daughter had spent a week learning to think of their family as a unit capable of handling whatever challenges came their way, and now he might have to explain that some problems were too big for love and determination to solve at 9 a.m., just as Liam was preparing to open the garage for what might be his last normal day of work before everything fell apart. A black town car pulled into his parking lot. Through the window, he watched a woman in an expensive business suit step out, followed by two men carrying briefcases and the kind of confident expressions that suggested they were accustomed to getting their way in high-stakes negotiations. Woman approached his garage with the purposeful stride of someone who viewed every interaction as a business transaction waiting to be completed. She was probably in her 40s, with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun, and eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of his modest business with calculating precision. "Mr. Callahan?" she called, her voice carrying the kind of professional authority that suggested she was accustomed to being taken seriously. "I'm Margaret Chun, CEO of Pinnacle Acquisition Group. I believe you've been expecting us." Liam wiped his hands on his coveralls and approached the group with the kind of careful attention he usually reserved for diffusing potentially explosive situations. "I'm not sure what I've been expecting, but I assume you're here about Maya Linwood." "Ms. Linwood has made her decision," Margaret Chun said, consulting a tablet that apparently contained detailed information about his personal life. "She's agreed to our terms for the acquisition of her company, which means that certain information about your family situation will remain confidential." Relief flooded through Liam's system like cold water, immediately followed by a kind of grief that felt disproportionate to losing something he'd never really had. Maya had chosen to protect him and Rosie, which meant she'd sacrificed years of work and probably thousands of jobs to preserve their fictional family. However, Margaret Chun continued, Ms. Linwood has also made some additional demands that complicate our arrangement. What kind of demands? She's insisted on specific protections for the communities and programs that her foundation has been supporting. She's also demanded personal guarantees regarding your family's privacy and security. Most significantly, she's refused to complete the transaction unless you agree to certain conditions that she's outlined in this document. Margaret Chun handed him an envelope that felt heavier than its contents should have warranted. Inside, he found a letter written in Maya's precise handwriting on expensive stationery that somehow made her words feel more formal than the intimate conversations they'd shared over the past week. Liam, the letter began, by the time you read this, I'll have agreed to sell my company to preserve our family's privacy and Rosie's security. This isn't a sacrifice. It's an investment in the life I want to build with you and Rosie, if you'll have me. But I need you to understand that this decision comes with obligations that extend beyond our personal relationship. The communities that my foundation has been supporting, including Havenport, need continued funding to maintain their programs. I've structured the sale to ensure that those programs continue, but they'll need local oversight and management that I can't provide from a distance. I'm asking you to consider becoming the local coordinator for the Foundation's community development work in this region. The position comes with a salary that would provide financial security for your family, and it would allow you to use your natural understanding of this community's needs to help other families facing challenges similar to what we've experienced. This isn't charity, and it's not payment for accepting me into your family. It's recognition that you have skills and insights that can't be taught in business school. You understand what it means to build something real with limited resources, and you know how to prioritize human needs over profit margins. These are exactly the qualities that community development work requires. If you're willing to consider this opportunity, Margaret Chun can provide you with details about the position and its responsibilities. If you decide it's not something you want to pursue, the offer will remain open, and your decision won't affect our personal relationship in any way. I love you and Rosie more than I knew it was possible to love anyone. Whatever you decide about the job, I hope you'll decide that our family is worth making real. All my love, Maya Pease. I've arranged for Rosie's school to receive a new playground and library renovation through the Foundation's final community grant. She'll never know it came from me specifically, but I wanted her to have something beautiful. That reminds her that good things can happen when people who care about each other work together. Liam read the letter twice before looking up at Margaret Chun, who was watching his reaction with a kind of professional interest that suggested she was accustomed to witnessing people's responses to life-changing propositions. The position Ms. Linwood has proposed, she said, would involve coordinating community development grants, overseeing local program implementation, and serving as a liaison between rural communities and urban funding sources. It would require some travel within the region, but it would be based here in Havenport. The salary would be $65,000 annually, plus benefits and a professional development budget. $65,000 was more money than Liam had ever imagined earning, enough to provide Rosie with the kind of stability and opportunities he'd been working toward since she was born. But it also represented a fundamental change in how he understood his place in the world. Instead of struggling to solve his own problems, he'd be helping other families navigate challenges that he understood from personal experience. Why would Maya structure the deal this way? He asked, because she believes that effective philanthropy requires local knowledge and personal investment that can't be purchased or imported from outside communities, Margaret Chun said. And because she wants to ensure that her life's work continues. to serve its intended purpose, even after she's no longer directly involved in its management. And if I say no, then the foundation will hire someone else to coordinate the regional programs. And you and Ms. Linwood will figure out your personal relationship without any professional complications. Liam thought about Maya's words in the letter about her. Recognition of skills he'd never thought of as professional assets. Growing up in Havenport, helping his neighbors solve problems that ranged from mechanical failures to financial crises. Learning to balance competing needs with limited resources. These experiences had felt like survival strategies rather than career preparation. But Maya saw them as qualifications for work that could affect entire communities. Can I have some time to think about this? Ms. Linwood is waiting for your answer before she finalizes the transition arrangements, Margaret Chun said. But she also wanted me to tell you that whatever you decide about the job, she'll be back in Havenport this evening. She has some things to discuss with you and Rosie about your family's future. After Margaret Chun and her associates left, Liam sat in his garage office, surrounded by the familiar chaos of receipts and work orders and automotive parts, trying to process the magnitude of the choices that Maya had made and the opportunities she'd created. The paparazzi photo that had started this crisis, a leaked image of Maya and Rosie building sandcastles while Liam watched from the shore, now felt like evidence of a different story entirely. Instead of documenting Maya's temporary escape from corporate responsibility, the photo captured the moment when she'd decided that her most important work wasn't happening in boardrooms or executive offices. It showed someone who'd found her purpose in helping a 6-year-old conquer her fear of hermit crabs and supporting a struggling father who'd been too proud to ask for help until desperation made honesty possible. By midday, word had somehow spread through Havenport's efficient gossip network that important business people had been visiting Liam's garage, and Mrs. Patterson had appointed herself the unofficial coordinator of community curiosity. Liam, dear, she said, shuffling into his garage with a kind of determined purposefulness that suggested she intended to get answers to questions that everyone was too polite to ask directly. People are saying that Maya might be someone more important than she initially let on. Maya is exactly who she's always been, Liam said, which was both completely true and deliberately evasive. But there are rumors about business deals and foundation work and opportunities that might change things for your family. Liam looked at Mrs. Patterson, whose 73 years in Havenport had given her the kind of community wisdom that couldn't be learned from books or professional training. Mrs. Patterson, if someone offered you a chance to help other families in situations similar to what I've been dealing with, families struggling to provide for their children despite working as hard as they know, how would you think that was? Worth pursuing? I'd think it was exactly the kind of work that people like you are supposed to do, she said without hesitation. People who understand that there's more than one way to measure success, and that sometimes the most important problems don't have technical solutions. What do you mean? I mean that you've been fixing things your whole life, Liam. Cars, certainly, but also situations that seemed impossible until you applied the right combination of patience and creativity and sheer stubborn determination to make them work. Community development sounds like fixing things on a larger scale. As afternoon faded into evening, Liam found himself standing on the harbor docks where he'd taken Rosie and Maya to look for hermit crabs during their first real conversation. The tide was coming in, and he could see families of crabs negotiating the complex social dynamics of shell selection and territorial boundaries with the kind of practical wisdom that made their survival possible in an environment that changed. Twice daily. Maya had been right about hermit crabs being tiny homeowners who couldn't decide which house they liked best. But watching them now, Liam realized that their apparent indecision was actually careful evaluation. They were testing different shells until they found the one that provided the best combination of protection and mobility for the life they wanted to live. Maybe that's what he and Maya had been doing for the past week. testing different versions of their relationship until they found the one that provided the best combination of authenticity and sustainability for the life they wanted to build together. When Maya's silver sedan pulled into his parking lot just as the sun was setting behind the harbor, Liam felt his heart rate accelerate in the way that usually preceded either very good news or very bad news. Through the window, he could see her sitting in the driver's seat for a moment before getting out, as if she was gathering her courage for a conversation that would determine the rest of their lives. She looked tired in ways that went beyond physical exhaustion, the kind of weariness that came from making decisions that affected more people than just yourself, and from sacrificing things you'd worked years to build in order to protect things that mattered more. "Hi," she said, approaching him with the kind of tentative uncertainty that suggested she wasn't sure what kind of reception she was going to receive. "Hi yourself," Liam replied, and then, because words felt inadequate for everything he wanted to say, he crossed the distance between them and pulled her into a hug that was meant to communicate gratitude and relief and love and apology, all at the same time. "I read your letter," he said into her hair, which smelled like expensive shampoo and stress, and the lingering scent of the ocean air that had become their shared perfume. And I think you're crazy to give up everything you've built for. Someone who drives a 15-year-old pickup truck and lives above a garage. But I also think I love you for being exactly the kind of crazy that would make that sacrifice seem reasonable. Does that mean you'll consider the job offer?" Liam pulled back to look at her face, searching for signs of doubt or regret in her expression. But Maya's eyes held the same determined clarity that had convinced him to trust her with his most desperate request just over a week ago. "It means I'll consider building a life with you that involves work we both believe in and a family that we both choose every day, even though it means everything changes, especially because it means everything changes." As they stood there in his parking lot, surrounded by the evidence of the life he'd built through necessity and determination, Liam realized that Maya's offer represented more than financial security or professional opportunity. It represented the chance to transform survival strategies into service, to use the skills he'd developed while trying to keep his own family together to help other families navigate similar challenges. Tomorrow, he would give Margaret Chun his answer. Tonight, he had more important work to do, helping Rosie understand that the family they'd created through performance had become real enough to survive whatever changes came next, and that sometimes the best decisions were the ones that scared you most because they required you to believe you deserved better than what you'd previously thought possible. Tuesday morning brought the kind of crystalline autumn weather that made every detail of Havenport stand out in sharp relief, as if the universe had decided to provide perfect lighting for the most important conversation of Liam's life. He sat at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago, staring at the custody hearing documents that had arrived by courier at Dawn official papers that represented either the final confirmation of his family's security or the beginning of a legal battle that could destroy everything they'd built together. The documents were more extensive than he'd expected, filled with legal language that transformed his personal relationships into evidence and his parental decisions into items for judicial review. Seeing his life reduced to affidavits and financial statements felt like watching someone dissect something beautiful to understand how it worked, destroying its essential nature in the process of analysis. Maya sat across from him, her own copy of the documents spread across the table like a map of territory neither of them had wanted to explore. She'd been quiet since the papers arrived, reading each page with a kind of methodical attention that suggested she was preparing for battle rather than simply reviewing information. "They're really going through with this," she said finally, looking up from a section that detailed the allegations against their family. "Even after you agreed to take the job, even after I sacrificed the company to protect our privacy, they're still pursuing legal action. Richard Morrison said this wasn't just about business leverage anymore. Liam said, thinking about the private investigator's cold satisfaction when he delivered their ultimatum. He said it was about setting an example for anyone else who might consider standing in their way. So we're collateral damage in someone else's corporate war. It looks that way. Maya set down the papers with the kind of careful precision that suggested she was trying to maintain control over something that felt increasingly chaotic. Liam, I need you to understand that this hearing isn't just about your custody of Rosie anymore. They're going to argue that our entire relationship was a fraud designed to deceive the social services system, and they're going to use that as evidence that you're willing to put your own interests ahead of Rosie's welfare. And what's our defense? The truth. That our relationship started as a deception, but became real. That we fell in love while pretending to be in love. That our family became authentic, even though it began as performance. Liam thought about the week they'd spent learning to live together, about the domestic routines that had felt natural despite being constructed for an audience, about the way Rosie had accepted Maya as her stepmother before any of them had figured out whether their relationship was permanent. Will anyone believe that? I don't know. But it's the only defense we have, because it's the only truth that matters. Before either of them could explore the implications of building a legal strategy around emotional authenticity, they heard the sound of small feet running down the stairs. Rosie appeared in the kitchen doorway, wearing her school uniform and carrying her backpack. But her usual morning enthusiasm was subdued by the tension she could sense between the adults, even if she didn't understand its source. Are you and Maya fighting? She asked, settling into her chair with the kind of careful attention that suggested she was prepared to mediate whatever conflict had created the atmosphere in their apartment. We're not fighting, sweetheart, Liam said, gathering the legal documents and setting them aside to give Rosie his full attention. We're trying to solve some grown-up problems that are more complicated than we expected. What kind of problems? Maya reached across the table to take Rosie's hand, and Liam was struck by how natural the gesture had become, how seamlessly Maya had integrated herself into their family's physical and emotional rhythms. Remember how we explained that some people don't think our family is real because it happened quickly? Maya said. Those people want to prove that you'd be better off living with someone else instead of with me and your daddy. Rosie's expression shifted from confusion to the kind of indignant determination that Liam recognized as his own stubbornness filtered through 6-year-old directness. But that's stupid, she said with the absolute certainty that children brought to questions of basic fairness. We are a real family. I can prove it. How can you prove it? Liam asked, curious about his daughter's perspective on their situation. Because real families take care of each other, and we take care of each other. Real families know each other's favorite things, and we know each other's favorite things. Real families help each other when things are hard, and we always help each other when things are hard. But some people might say that real families have been together for a long time. Maya said gently, and we've only been a family for a couple of weeks. Rosie considered this with the kind of serious attention she usually reserved for important decisions about ice cream flavors or bedtime stories. Mrs. Chun at school adopted her daughter when she was 8 years old, she said finally. And nobody says they're not a real family just because they weren't together since the daughter was a baby. Mrs. Chun says that families are made by love, not by time. The simple wisdom of Rosie's observation hit Liam with unexpected force. His daughter had unconsciously identified the central weakness in their opponent's argument, the assumption that authenticity required duration, that relationships that developed quickly were somehow less valid than those that formed gradually. Rosie's right, Maya said, and something in her expression suggested that their daughter's perspective had crystallized thoughts she'd been struggling to articulate. The people who want to break up our family are arguing that time creates legitimacy, but that's not how love works. Love creates legitimacy, and time just gives you opportunities to prove what was already true. So our defense is that we fell in love quickly, but genuinely. Our defense is that we built a real family in whatever time we had available, and that Rosie's welfare has always been our primary concern. After Rosie left for school with promises that she would explain to anyone who asked why their family was the best family in the world, Maya and Liam spent the morning preparing for the hearing with a kind of methodical attention at high stakes. Legal proceedings required. They reviewed their timeline, organized their evidence, and practiced answering the kinds of hostile questions that opposing counsel would likely ask Dot. But as the morning progressed, Liam found himself thinking less about legal strategy and more about the fundamental questions that their situation raised. What made a family real? How did love transition from performance to authenticity? At what point did temporary arrangements become permanent commitments? Maya, he said during a break in their preparation, can I ask you something that might not have a comfortable answer? Of course. If we hadn't been forced into this situation, if you hadn't needed to make sacrifices to protect us, if there hadn't been external pressure threatening our relationship, do you think we would have ended up together anyway? Maya was quiet for a long moment, and Liam could see her considering the question with the kind of honest self-reflection that most people avoided when the stakes felt too high for comfortable truths. I think we would have been too scared, she said finally. I think I would have convinced myself that you couldn't possibly want someone like me for who I am, rather than what I can provide. And I think you would have convinced yourself that someone like me couldn't possibly be happy with the kind of life you have to offer. And now? Now we've already seen each other at our most vulnerable. We've already proven that we can function as a family unit under pressure. We've already made sacrifices for each other that go beyond rational self-interest. So the crisis forced us to skip the parts of relationship development that might have prevented us from ever becoming a couple in the first place. Something like that. As they prepared to leave for the courthouse, Liam found himself thinking about hermit crabs again, about the way they tested different shells until they found the one that provided the best combination of protection and mobility. He and Maya had been forced to try on the shell of marriage and family before they'd had time to evaluate whether it fit properly. But somehow, the urgency had revealed truths about their compatibility that a longer courtship might have obscured. Courthouse was a brick building that had probably been imposing when it was constructed in the 1950s, but now felt merely institutional. The kind of place where personal relationships were reduced to legal precedents and emotional complexity was translated into procedural language. As they walked through the metal detectors and found their assigned courtroom, Liam was struck by how different this environment felt from their domestic life, how difficult it would be to explain the authenticity of their morning routines, and evening conversations in a place designed for adversarial proceedings. Their lawyer, Maria Santos, met them in the hallway outside the courtroom with a kind of confident professionalism that suggested she'd handled similar cases before and understood both the legal complexities and the human stakes involved. The judge assigned to this case is Margaret Walsh, she said, consulting her notes with the efficiency of someone who believed in thorough preparation. She's known for taking child welfare seriously, but she's also pragmatic about family structures that fall outside traditional patterns. Our best strategy is to focus on Rosie's actual welfare, rather than trying to defend the circumstances that brought your family together. What should we expect from their side? Maya asked. They'll argue that the deception indicates poor judgment and questionable priorities. They'll probably try to portray your relationship as unstable because it developed quickly and under artificial circumstances. And they'll definitely emphasize the financial aspects, the fact that Maya's wealth creates a power imbalance that could affect the relationship's long-term viability. As they entered the courtroom and took their places at the defendant's table, Liam felt the weight of official scrutiny settling around him like a net. The room was smaller than he'd expected, with wood paneling that had probably been intended to convey dignity, but instead felt oppressive. Judge Walsh was already seated at the bench, a woman in her 50s with gray hair and the kind of expression that suggested she'd seen enough family dysfunction to approach every case with appropriate skepticism. When Richard Morrison and his legal team entered the courtroom, Liam was struck by how much they looked like people who viewed other people's problems as business opportunities. Morrison himself carried the same predatory confidence that had been evident during his visit to Havenport, and his lawyers moved with the kind of efficient purpose that suggested they were accustomed to winning cases through superior resources. Rather than superior arguments, as Judge Walsh called the hearing to order and began reviewing the preliminary materials, Liam realized that the next few hours would determine not just his custody of Rosie, but the future of the family that he and Maya had built through a combination of desperation, deception, and unexpected love. This is a custody review hearing initiated by a complaint alleging fraud in the family assessment process, Judge Walsh announced, her voice carrying the kind of neutral authority that suggested she approached every case with professional detachment. Mr. Morrison, as the complainant, you may present your opening statement. Richard Morrison rose from his table with the confidence of someone who believed his victory was predetermined. Your Honor, this case represents a clear example of deliberate deception designed to manipulate the social services system. Mr. Callahan and Ms. Linwood constructed an elaborate fiction of engagement and domestic partnership specifically to influence the outcome of a custody evaluation. They fabricated evidence, created false documentation, and presented themselves as a stable family unit when in reality they were virtual strangers, participating in a performance designed to prevent the state from removing a child from an inadequate home environment. Morrison consulted his notes with the precision of someone who'd rehearsed this presentation multiple times. The evidence will show that Ms. Linwood, a wealthy technology executive, agreed to this deception as part of what can only be described as a temporary escape from her professional responsibilities. Mr. Callahan, facing the loss of custody due to his financial instability and lack of family support, recruited Ms. Linwood to play the role of a committed partner despite having known her for less than a week. Your Honor, Morrison continued, the state's interest in child welfare requires that custody decisions be based on accurate information about family stability and support systems. When parents resort to elaborate deceptions to influence those evaluations, they demonstrate exactly the kind of poor judgment and questionable priorities that put children at risk. We respectfully request that Rosie Callahan be placed in foster care pending a complete re-evaluation of her father's fitness as a custodial parent. Maria Santos rose to present their defense with the kind of calm professionalism that suggested she'd faced hostile arguments before and understood how to respond without appearing defensive. Your Honor, this case is not about deception. It's about the difference between legal technicalities and actual family welfare. Yes, Mr. Callahan and Ms. Linwood's relationship began under unusual circumstances. But the question before this court is not how their family formed, but whether their family is real and whether it serves Rosie's best interests. She moved closer to the judge's bench, establishing the kind of direct communication that suggested she wanted her words to carry personal weight rather than just legal authority. The evidence will show that regardless of how their relationship began, Mr. Callahan and Miss Linwood have created a stable, loving home environment for Rosie. They have demonstrated genuine commitment to her welfare. They have provided financial stability that addresses the concerns raised in the original evaluation. And most importantly, they have built the kind of family bonds that serve Rosie's emotional and developmental needs. Your Honor, families form in many different ways, through adoption, remarriage, blended households, and yes, sometimes through unconventional circumstances that bring people together around shared commitments to child welfare. The question is not whether Mr. Callahan and Ms. Linwood's relationship conforms to traditional timelines, but whether it provides Rosie with the stability and support that every child deserves. Judge Walsh made notes while both sides presented their opening statements, her expression revealing nothing about her initial impressions of the case. When the formal presentations concluded, she looked directly at Liam with the kind of penetrating attention that suggested she was trying to see past legal arguments to understand the human reality they were supposed to represent. "Mr. Callahan," she said, "I want to hear from you directly about the circumstances that led to your arrangement with Miss Linwood. Please explain to the court how this relationship developed and why you believe it serves your daughter's best interests." Liam stood with the kind of nervous energy that came from realizing that everything he said in the next few minutes could determine his family's future. The courtroom felt smaller than it had before, and he was acutely aware of Maya's presence beside him, of Morrison's hostile attention from across the room, and of the weight of official scrutiny that reduced his most personal relationships to evidence in a legal proceeding. "Your Honor," he began, his voice steadier than he'd expected, "I asked Maya to help me because I was desperate. The social worker told me that Rosie might be placed in foster care unless I could prove family stability. And I panicked. I knew I was a good father, but I also knew that I couldn't provide the kind of financial security and family support that the evaluation required." He paused, gathering his thoughts and trying to find words that would convey the complexity of what had happened between him and Maya without sounding like he was making excuses for their deception. But what started as a favor between strangers became something real very quickly. Maya didn't just pretend to be part of our family. She became part of our family. She learned Rosie's bedtime stories and her favorite breakfast foods. She helped with homework and listened to 6-year-old explanations of hermit crab social dynamics with the kind of patient attention that you can't fake. Liam looked at Maya, who was watching him with the kind of supportive attention that gave him courage to continue with complete honesty about their unconventional relationship. "Your Honor, I can't defend the fact that our engagement started as a lie, but I can tell you that everything that happened after that first conversation was real. The way Maya cared for Rosie, the way we learned to function as a family unit, the way we built domestic routines that felt natural despite being constructed under artificial circumstances, all of that was authentic, even if the original premise was deceptive." "And what about the financial arrangements?" Judge Walsh asked. "Ms. Linwood provided significant monetary support to address your debt situation. How do we distinguish between genuine partnership and a business transaction disguised as a relationship?" The question was more pointed than Liam had expected, and he realized that Judge Walsh was testing whether he could articulate the difference between Maya's financial support and the kind of transactional relationship that Morrison's team was trying to suggest. "Your Honor, Maya gave me that money before we discussed the future of our relationship. She gave it to me when she still thought our arrangement was temporary, when she had no reason to believe she'd get anything in return except the satisfaction of helping a family stay together. That's not how business transactions work. That's how families work." Judge Walsh made more notes, her expression still revealing nothing about her assessment of his testimony. "Mr. Callahan, I want to ask you directly. If Miss Linwood hadn't been willing to participate in this deception, what would you have done?" The question forced Liam to confront the desperate state of mind that had led him to ask a stranger for help with his most important problem. "I would have lost Rosie," he said simply. "I would have done everything I could to fight the system, but I didn't have the resources or the support network to prove that our family was stable enough to meet the state's requirements. And now? Now I believe we have the kind of family that any child would be lucky to be part of. Not because Maya solved our financial problems, but because she proved that love doesn't have to develop slowly to be real, and that families can be built around shared commitment to child welfare rather than shared history." As Liam returned to his seat, he felt the weight of having told the truth as completely as he could manage in a context that reduced personal relationships to legal arguments. Whether Judge Walsh would view their honesty as evidence of authentic commitment or merely sophisticated deception remained to be seen. But he'd done everything he could to explain why their unconventional family deserved to remain together. Hearing was far from over, but the foundation had been laid for a conversation about what made families real and what served children's best interests. In the next phase, Maya would have to explain her own motivations and defend decisions that had cost her years of professional work to protect people she'd known for less than 2 weeks. Looking at her as she prepared for her own testimony, Liam realized that their story was more than just an unusual romance or an elaborate deception. It was proof that love could develop under the most unlikely circumstances, and that families could be built around shared values rather than shared history. If the people involved were willing to prioritize authenticity over convenience and commitment over comfort. Judge Walsh called Maya to the witness stand with the kind of measured formality that suggested she understood the significance of this testimony. As Maya walked across the courtroom, Liam was struck by her composure. She carried herself with the confident grace of someone accustomed to high-stakes presentations, but there was something different in her posture today, a quality that suggested she was fighting for something that mattered more than any business deal she'd ever negotiated. "Ms. Linwood," Judge Walsh began, "you've heard Mr. Callahan's testimony about how your relationship developed. I'd like to hear your perspective on why a successful technology executive would agree to participate in what amounts to fraud against the social services system." Maya settled into the witness chair with the kind of careful attention that suggested she was choosing her words deliberately. In her hands, she held a document that Liam didn't recognize several pages of what appeared to be handwritten text that she consulted before speaking. "Your Honor, I want to begin by acknowledging that agreeing to Mr. Callahan's request was legally questionable and ethically complicated. I don't expect this court to excuse that decision based on good intentions, but I do want to explain why I made that choice, because I believe it reveals something important about the nature of our relationship and our commitment to Rosie's welfare." Maya paused, and Liam could see her gathering her thoughts in the way he'd learned to recognize during their week of domestic preparation. "I agreed to help Mr. Callahan because I recognized something in his situation that resonated with my own experience. I've spent most of my adult life in environments where my value was measured by my productivity and my potential for generating profit. People wanted relationships with me because of what I could provide, not because of who I was as a person. But when Mr. Callahan asked for my help, he was asking me to pretend to be someone who belonged in his family, not because of my wealth or my professional connections, but because of my capacity for love and commitment. For the first time in my life, someone was asking me to play a role that was based on emotional rather than financial value." Judge Walsh leaned forward slightly, and Liam could sense her genuine interest in Maya's explanation. "Ms. Linwood, are you saying that you viewed this deception as an opportunity to experience a different kind of relationship?" "I'm saying that what started as a favor to a stranger became the most authentic relationship I'd ever experienced. Living with Liam and Rosie, participating in their daily routines, learning to function as a family unit, it showed me what I'd been missing in my own life, and it made me realize that I wanted to be part of something that was based on mutual care rather than mutual benefit." Morrison's lead attorney rose from his table with a kind of aggressive confidence that suggested he'd been waiting for this moment. "Objection, Your Honor. Ms. Linwood's personal revelations about her relationship history are not relevant to the question of child welfare." "Your Honor," Maria Santos responded, "Ms. Linwood's motivations for participating in this arrangement are directly relevant to the court's assessment of whether their family relationship is genuine or merely transactional." Judge Walsh considered this exchange with the kind of thoughtful attention that suggested she was trying to balance legal procedure with the need to understand the human reality behind the formal arguments. "I'll allow the testimony to continue," she decided. Ms. Linwood, please explain how your personal motivations relate to your commitment to this family. Maya consulted the handwritten document in her hands, and Liam realized that what she was holding was the company's shares transfer document, the legal paperwork that represented her sacrifice of years of professional work to protect their relationship. Your Honor, during the week I spent living with Liam and Rosie, my company was under attack by competitors who were trying to force a hostile takeover. I had a choice: return to handle the crisis and potentially save my life's work, or stay in Havenport and protect the family we were building together. And you chose to sacrifice your company? I chose to prioritize the people who mattered most to me, but more importantly, I structured that sacrifice in a way that would benefit the communities my foundation had been serving, including Havenport itself. Maya held up the transfer documents so that Judge Walsh could see the official seals and signatures that made it legally binding. This document transfers 60% of my company's equity to a community development trust that will continue funding the educational and social programs that my foundation established. The remaining 40% was sold to ensure that thousands of people keep their jobs and that rural communities continue receiving the support they need. Ms. Linwood, Judge Walsh said, and Liam could hear something like amazement in her voice. Are you telling this court that you gave up control of your company to protect Mr. Callahan's custody of his daughter? I'm telling this court that I gave up control of my company to protect the family that had become more important to me than any business interest I'd ever pursued. And I structured that decision in a way that would continue serving communities like Havenport, because that's what families do. They make sacrifices that benefit not just themselves, but the larger communities they're part of. Morrison's attorney was on his feet immediately. Your Honor, this is exactly the kind of irrational decision-making that demonstrates why this relationship is unsuitable for child-rearing. Ms. Linwood has admitted to making multi-million-dollar business decisions based on emotional attachments that developed over the course of a single week. Your Honor, Maria Santos countered, Ms. Linwood has demonstrated exactly the kind of commitment to family welfare that we want to see in custodial relationships. She has shown that she prioritizes child welfare over financial gain, and she has structured her professional decisions to benefit the community where Rosie is being raised. Judge Walsh made extensive notes while the attorneys argued, but her attention remained focused on Maya, who was waiting to continue her testimony with a kind of patient determination that suggested she had more to say. Ms. Linwood, the judge, said, I want to ask you directly, do you believe that your relationship with Mr. Callahan and Rosie can survive the transition from performance to reality? You've made significant sacrifices based on feelings that developed under artificial circumstances. How do we know that this commitment will prove durable over time? Maya looked directly at Liam, and he saw something in her expression that went beyond the careful composure she'd maintained throughout the legal proceedings. For a moment, the courtroom seemed to fade away, and it felt like they were having one of their honest conversations in his small kitchen, while Rosie slept peacefully in the next room. Your Honor, I can't guarantee that any relationship will last forever. No one can make that promise about any family, regardless of how it formed. But I can tell you that the feelings I developed for Liam and Rosie weren't artificial, even if the circumstances that brought us together were unusual. Can you explain what you mean? I mean that you can't fake the way Rosie runs to you when she's excited about something that happened at school. You can't fake the way it feels to help a 6-year-old work through frustration with homework, or the way it feels to watch her father put her needs ahead of his own every single day. You can't fake the kind of contentment that comes from building domestic routines with people who value your presence for its own sake, rather than for what you can provide. Maya's voice carried increasing conviction as she spoke, and Liam realized that she was describing their relationship with the kind of detailed honesty that could only come from someone who'd actually lived the experiences she was recounting. Your Honor, the week I spent pretending to be part of Liam and Rosie's family taught me what I'd been missing in my own life. Not wealth or professional success or social status, but the simple satisfaction of being wanted for who you are, rather than what you can do for other people. That's not something you can fake, and it's not something that disappears when external circumstances change. And you believe that this understanding provides a sufficient foundation for long-term family commitment? I believe that understanding what you want from life is the first step toward building something real. And I know that what I want is to be part of a family that measures success by how well we take care of each other, not by how much money we accumulate or how impressive our professional achievements appear to outside observers. As Maya concluded her testimony and returned to their table, Liam felt something shift in the atmosphere of the courtroom. The legal arguments about deception and fraud suddenly seemed less relevant than the human truth Maya had articulated, that their relationship had become real because it was based on genuine care and mutual commitment. Regardless of the unusual circumstances that had brought them together, Judge Walsh called for a brief recess to review the testimony and consider her decision. As they waited in the hallway outside the courtroom, Liam found himself thinking about the company shares transfer document that Maya had presented as evidence of her commitment. She'd given up years of work to protect a family that had existed for less than 2 weeks, but somehow that sacrifice felt like the most rational decision either of them had ever made. Whatever happens, he said to Maya as they prepared to return for the judge's ruling, I want you to know that what we built together was real, even if it started as pretend. I know, Maya replied, reaching for his hand with the kind of natural affection that had developed during their week of domestic performance and had somehow survived the transition to legal scrutiny. And regardless of what Judge Walsh decides, we're going to figure out how to make it work. When they returned to the courtroom for the final phase of the hearing, Liam realized that their story had evolved far beyond a simple custody dispute. They were defending not just his right to raise Rosie, but the validity of families that formed through unconventional circumstances, and the possibility that love could develop under artificial conditions and still prove authentic over time. That judge's decision would determine whether their experiment in performed family life could transition to permanent reality, or whether the legal system would view their deception as disqualifying, regardless of the genuine commitment that had emerged from it. 6 months later, the morning light streaming through the windows of Liam and Maya's renovated apartment above. The garage had the golden quality that made Havenport look like a town suspended between seasons, not quite spring, not quite summer, but caught in the perfect moment when everything felt possible and new. Maya stood at the kitchen counter, preparing coffee with the kind of easy efficiency that came from 6 months of shared morning routines, while Liam helped Rosie with the complex engineering project of French braiding her own hair. The apartment looked different now, larger somehow, despite being the same physical space they'd shared during their week of elaborate deception. Maya's books had found permanent homes on Liam's shelves. Their kitchen equipment had merged into a collection that reflected both practical necessity and occasional culinary ambition, and the walls displayed a mixture of Rosie's artwork and professionally framed photographs that documented their transition from performance to reality. The new family photo sat in a place of honor on the mantel, professional portrait taken just after their real wedding, showing 3 people who looked genuinely happy rather than carefully posed. In the picture, Liam wore the same suit he'd borrowed for their custody hearing. Maya wore a simple white dress that somehow managed to look both elegant and practical, and Rosie wore a blue flower girl dress that she'd chosen specifically because it matched the color of the ocean on clear days. "Daddy," Rosie said, examining her reflection in the hallway mirror with the critical attention of someone who took personal presentation seriously, "do you think my hair looks professional enough for Bring Your Family to Work Day? I think you look exactly like someone who belongs at a community development foundation." Liam said, adjusting the ribbon that held her braid in place. "But more importantly, I think you look like someone who's excited to see where Maya works. I want to see the computer that helps other families like us," Rosie announced with the kind of straightforward curiosity that had made her an excellent guide to hermit crab social dynamics and an even better judge of adult authenticity. Maya joined them in the hallway, carrying 3 travel mugs of coffee and wearing the kind of professional attire that somehow managed to suggest both competence and approachability. Over the past 6 months, she'd transformed her role as regional coordinator for the Community Development Trust into something that looked less like traditional philanthropy and more like neighbors helping neighbors solve problems that required both local knowledge and external resources. "Are you ready to see the office?" Maya asked Rosie, who nodded with the enthusiasm of someone who'd been looking forward to this field trip for weeks. "Will I get to meet the people who help families when they need extra support? You'll get to meet everyone who works at the foundation. And you'll get to see how we decide which families and communities receive grants for things like school programs and small business loans." As they prepared to leave from Maya's office, a converted warehouse, space that served as the regional headquarters for what had become the Havenport Community Development Trust, Liam found himself reflecting on the changes that 6 months had brought to their lives and their community. Judge Walsh's decision had been delivered with the kind of measured authority that had characterized her entire approach to their unusual case. She'd ruled that while their original deception was legally questionable and ethically complicated, the evidence showed that their family relationship had become genuine and that Rosie's welfare was clearly being served by their unconventional arrangement. "The court finds," Judge Walsh had said, "that regardless of how this family formed, it now functions as a stable, loving unit that prioritizes child welfare above adult convenience. Mr. Callahan retains full custody of his daughter, and the court recognizes Ms. Linwood as Rosie's legal stepmother, pending completion of formal adoption proceedings." But more significantly, Judge Walsh had used their case as an opportunity to address broader questions about how the social services system evaluated family stability and support systems. "This case highlights the need for more flexible approaches to family assessment," she'd concluded. "While we must maintain vigilance against fraud and deception, we must also recognize that families form in many different ways, and that love and commitment can develop under circumstances that don't conform to traditional timelines or CONVE, UNTION, our relationship patterns." The aftermath of the hearing had been more complex than any of them had anticipated. Morrison's attempt to expose their relationship had backfired spectacularly when local media picked up the story and transformed it from a scandal about corporate manipulation into a heartwarming narrative about love conquering bureaucracy and big business. Maya's sacrifice of her company to protect their family had resonated with readers who were tired of stories about corporate greed and impressed by examples of people who prioritized human relationships over financial gain. Instead of being portrayed as unstable or deceptive, their relationship had become a symbol of authentic values triumphing over systemic obstacles. The publicity had also revealed the extent to which Maya's foundation had been quietly supporting communities throughout the region. Havenport residents had learned that their new playground, library renovation, and small business loan program had all been funded by the woman who'd been living above Callahan's auto repair while pretending to be engaged to their local mechanic. "She was helping us before she even knew us," Mrs. Patterson had said during a town meeting called to discuss the foundation's future. "And now she's chosen to make her home here permanently. That tells me everything I need to know about her character and her commitment to our community." The community's response had been overwhelmingly supportive, but it had also created new responsibilities that none of them had expected. Maya's decision to establish the foundation's regional headquarters in Havenport had brought jobs and resources to a town that had been slowly losing both for decades. Liam's role as community liaison had evolved into something that felt less like a job and more like a calling. He spent his days helping families navigate crises similar to what he'd experienced. And he'd discovered that his combination of mechanical skills and personal understanding of financial stress made him unusually effective at finding practical solutions to complex problems. "Daddy," Rosie said as they walked toward Maya's office. "Building. Remember when you used to worry about having enough money to take care of me?" "I remember," Liam said, thinking about the man he'd been 6 months ago, desperate, overwhelmed, and convinced that love alone wasn't sufficient to provide his daughter with the stability she deserved. "Do you still worry about that?" "I worry about different things now," he said honestly. "I worry about whether we're helping other families as effectively as we could be. I worry about whether the Foundation's programs are reaching the people who need them most. I worry about whether Maya and I are setting a good example for you about how families should work." "Those are better worries," Rosie announced with the kind of definitive wisdom that children brought to complex adult problems. "Why are they better?" "Because those are worries about helping other people instead of worries about whether we have enough for ourselves. Maya says that's how you know you're living the right kind of life, when your biggest worries are about how to give more instead of how to get more." The Foundation's office occupied the ground floor of a renovated brick building that had once housed a fishing supply company. Maya had deliberately chosen a space that felt more like a community center than a corporate headquarters, with large windows that let in natural light and meeting rooms that were designed for conversation rather than presentation. As they entered the main workspace, Liam was struck by how different this environment felt from what he imagined Maya's previous office had been like. Instead of the isolated executive suite that probably characterized most corporate leadership positions, the Foundation operated as an open, collaborative space where program coordinators worked alongside administrative staff and community liaisons. Shared desks with data analysts. "Maya," called out James Chun, the Foundation's education program coordinator and Mrs. Patterson's nephew, who'd returned to Havenport after college specifically to work for the organization that his aunt couldn't stop talking about. "Perfect timing. The Millfield Elementary proposal just came in, and I wanted to get your input before the review meeting this afternoon." "And the small business loan applications?" Maya asked, settling into her desk with the kind of comfortable authority that suggested she'd found her professional home and work that felt more like community service than corporate management. 12 new applications this week, including 3 from women-owned businesses and 2 from veteran entrepreneurs, replied Sarah Martinez, the Foundation's economic development specialist. "Liam, I've got 2 applications that involve automotive services. I was hoping you could review them for technical feasibility." As Liam examined the loan applications, one for a mobile mechanic service that would serve rural areas, another for a vintage car restoration business that could become a tourism draw, he realized that his transition from struggling single father to community development professional had been less dramatic than he'd expected. The skills that had helped him keep his garage running despite financial constraints were directly applicable to helping other small business owners navigate similar challenges. "Daddy's really good at helping people fix problems," Rosie announced to the office in general, having appointed herself as an unofficial tour guide for the day. "He fixed Maya's car, and then he fixed our family, and now he helps fix other families' problems too." "That's exactly right," Maya said, joining their conversation with the kind of easy affection that had developed during 6 months of learning to balance professional responsibilities with family life. "Your daddy has a gift for understanding what people really need instead of just what they think they want." As the morning progressed, Rosie shadowed various Foundation staff members, learning about grant applications and community assessment and the complex logistics of matching resources with needs. But what seemed to fascinate her most was the wall display that showed the Foundation's impact across the region, maps dotted with pins representing funded projects. photographs of renovated schools and successful small businesses, and testimonials from families who'd received support during difficult transitions. "Maya," Rosie said during their lunch break, "how many families like ours have you helped?" "What do you mean by families like ours?" "Families that needed help staying together when money problems made things scary." Maya considered the question with the kind of thoughtful attention that Rosie's observations always deserved. "The foundation has provided emergency support to 47 families in situations similar to what your daddy was facing. But more importantly, we've funded programs that help prevent those situations from developing in the first place." "Like what kind of programs?" "Like after-school childcare for single parents who work multiple jobs. Like emergency medical funds for families without health insurance. Like job training programs that help people develop skills for better paying work. So you help families before they get to the scary part." "We try to. Though sometimes families need help during the scary part too, and that's okay." As afternoon faded into evening and they prepared to return home, Liam found himself reflecting on the strange circularity of their story. 6 months ago, Maya had been a wealthy executive hiding from corporate responsibilities in a small coastal town. He'd been a struggling mechanic, convinced that his love for his daughter wasn't sufficient to provide her with the stability she deserved. Now Maya ran a foundation that helped families navigate exactly the kinds of crises that had once threatened to destroy his family. He'd become a community advocate whose personal experience with financial desperation made him unusually effective at understanding what struggling families actually needed. And Rosie had grown into a confident, secure child who understood that families were defined by commitment rather than circumstances, and that success was measured by the help you could provide to others rather than the wealth you could accumulate. "For yourself, you know what I realized today?" Rosie said as they walked home through downtown Havenport, past the shops and restaurants that had begun to thrive as the foundation's economic development programs attracted new businesses and visitors to the area. "What did you realize?" Liam asked. "I realized that our pretend family became a real family, but then our real family became something even better." "What's better than a real family?" "A real family that helps other families become real too." As they reached their apartment above the garage, Liam looked up at the windows that glowed with warm light against the evening sky. The building looked exactly the same as it had 6 months ago, but everything about their life had been transformed by Maya's willingness to participate in an elaborate deception that had somehow revealed truths none of them had expected to discover. That evening, as they settled into their established routine of dinner preparation and homework review, and the extended bedtime negotiation process that remained Rosie's specialty, Liam found himself thinking about hermit crabs again. Maya had been right about them being tiny homeowners who couldn't decide which house they liked best. But watching them over the past 6 months had taught him something more. Hermit crabs didn't change shells because they were indecisive. They changed shells because they kept growing. And growth required bigger spaces that could accommodate who they were becoming rather than who they had been. Sometimes the best decisions were the ones that required you to abandon familiar comfort for unknown possibilities that might offer room for the person you were capable of becoming. Looking at Maya, as she helped Rosie with a math project that involved calculating the area of various geometric shapes, he realized that their story wasn't really about deception or desperation, or even about love conquering bureaucracy. It was about 3 people who'd been brave enough to trust that they could grow into a family that was bigger and better than any life they could have built separately. 6 months ago, he'd asked a stranger to pretend to be his wife for one day. Tonight, he was married to his best friend and business partner, raising a daughter who understood that families were built by choice rather than chance, and working to help other families discover that love and commitment could overcome almost any obstacle if people were willing to prioritize what mattered most. Some lies became true through repetition. But some truths could only be discovered by being brave enough to pretend, for just long enough to realize that what you were pretending to be was actually who you'd always wanted to become.